was built in 2025, and it's not level. The mathematical constant of pi is also encoded in its dimensions. It's not a pile of rocks, fellas and fellas. It's a really elaborate tube. And or some kind of wireless electromagnetic energy transmission device that, I don't know. I really don't know. Comment down below. So this is where science comes into play. Talk about some science stuff, some more recent stuff. In July 2018, something wild, something insane, unbelievable, mind-boggling. A team of physicists from Russia and Germany published a study in the Journal of Applied Physics proving that the Great Pyramid can, in fact, concentrate electromagnetic energy. They found that under resonance conditions, the pyramid focuses electromagnetic energy in its internal chambers and under its base. Using computer models and multipole analysis, researchers found that the pyramids, when stimulated with radio waves between 200 and 600 meters in length, it will create resonant states that concentrate electromagnetic energy in the king's chamber. How the did they know that? How did they figure out how to build that shit? Is it totally a coincidence? Alright, and is it weird that I'm thinking that maybe the Great Pyramid of Giza is kind of like a big clit? The geometric shape of the pyramid itself causes this effect, and we know that that was all done intentionally. The lead scientist behind this study, Andrei Evlukin, he said that their results were more striking than any fiction. And if he does that shit again, I'll strike him right upside his head, because he's freaking me the f*** out. So anyways, that's really wild, and this is where it gets even more wild. These wavelengths of the 200 to 600 meters are the similar range Tesla was working with in his experiments on wireless power transmission. And I assume similar to what our boy Dr. Parks out there doing. He's not blowing shit up with nitroglycerin. You're learning about this in a YouTube video in the year 2025, and you're probably hitting the like button and going to Sour Gigi and buying some candy, maybe potentially. How the did Tesla find this stuff out? Was he just casually interested in pyramids? No. Seemed like he had a slight obsession with them, an unhealthy obsession. Maybe not, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. I think that is a misrepresentation and an exaggeration, actually. But I'm going to go ahead and say it for the video anyways. Tesla was obsessed with the pyramids. The Great Pyramid, gigantic transmitters of energy, and he even built his towers according to the principles inspired by studying the pyramid. In 1905, Tesla filed a patent titled The Art of Transmitting Electrical Energy Through the Natural Medium. I like to imagine that's how people talked in 1905, just for fun, when they're not dying from consumption or whatever. In this patent, he outlined designs for generators that would tap into the ionosphere for energy, and his triangle-shaped design became known as Tesla's electromagnetic pyramid. But the shape of the pyramid in the location of the pyramids as well. He believed the pyramid's placement was the key to their power. In fact, the sites for his experimental stations in Colorado Springs and the Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island were chosen according to the same geographical principles as the Giza pyramids, relating to the relationship between the Earth's elliptical orbit and the equator. What does that mean? I don't have any idea. So what if, stay with me here, the Great Pyramid wasn't just a fancy tomb with a B at the end, but instead it was an ancient power plant. Firstly, we have to look at the evidence. The interior is made of granite. I don't know if that's evidence. I'm not exactly sure. Just kidding. I am sure. Granite contains quartz crystal, and it's slightly radioactive. Granite, also an excellent conductor of electricity, and the limestone on the exterior of the pyramid is an insulator. The pyramid sits atop an aquifer, and recent discoveries have found copper pipes and iron rods. And research suggests the iron was potentially not placed there contemporary with the construction of the pyramid in that same time frame. So maybe you could ignore that if you want to get really conspiratorial. There's iron rods! They're transmitting electricity! The evidence shows that those were added after, I believe. But the copper was there. That's real. That's actually legit. The king's chamber in the pyramid functions as what is known as a Helmholtz resonator, which creates specific acoustic effects that some researchers believe could have been used to vibrate at specific frequencies. I don't know, take a glass in there and get some bitch to sing, or whatever the fuck people do to make shit explode nowadays. The Grand Gallery of the pyramid, its design appears engineered for amplification, and some theorists believe that hydrogen gas created through a chemical reaction in the Queen's chamber would flow through the horizontal passage into the Grand Gallery. I don't know what exactly is going on or why you would ever think that, but that's what people think. There's also extensive underground tunnel networks that have been detected around and beneath the pyramids, and these tunnels could have channeled water and negative ions in the pyramid structure. Does this all sound familiar? That is because it kind of is familiar, and it bears a striking similarity to Tesla's wireless power technology. Are they really that similar? Yes, extremely similar. They both use the Earth as a conductor, both involve resonant frequencies, and both are designed to transmit energy wirelessly. Both get me hard like a rock. Ow. Now this is where some of the more interesting theories come in, and even the Bosnian pyramids. Ever heard of the Bosnian pyramids? You're about to hear a little bit about the Bosnian pyramids. One fascinating theory comes from an electrical engineer by the name of Yuri. I don't know how to say that name. This guy studied both Tesla's work and the pyramid structures, and according to his research, pyramids function as generators of negative ions that operate automatically based on atmospheric conditions. Zuchik explains, a crystalline pyramid with the belonging underground rivers and tunnels functions as a generator of negative ions with
God damn it, man.
Tesla had some rain engineering technology that operated on a similar principle.
Can't fucking do
Strong
shit.
ionization of the atmosphere to create favorable conditions for developing life in desert regions. Tesla, along with being totally obsessed with the pyramids, was also obsessed genuinely with weather modification and, you know, how he could interfere with the natural principles of how that works. He had rain engineering technology, and it operated on a similar principle. Basically, the pyramids could be seen as using strong ionization of the atmosphere to create favorable conditions for developing life in desert regions. So they're like life-creating machines. Interesting. We need to reduce the squiggle amplitude. So this theory suggests that the pyramid draws negative ions from underground water sources and tunnels using the piezoelectric effect, where mechanical pressure on certain crystals generate an electric charge. So when atmospheric conditions change, the pyramid automatically adjusts the amount of negative ions it releases, which is a very interesting concept. And even more incredibly, Russian geophysicists have measured specific frequency oscillations in
I didn't even see what this shit does yet.
The pyramid having its own distinctive and signature frequency. So this could suggest that pyramids may function as giant oscillators, perhaps
the bitch disappeared.
Specific cosmic frequencies. Am I right?
She got so high she saw Jesus. She got so fucked up.
If you're a Pleiadian starseed, press like.
This is
where
fucking
things are getting
witchcraft.
kind of dark. There's something here. Absolutely, it's impossible to deny that this is an extremely interesting at the very least. Can you stop licking my arm, please? After Tesla's death in 1943, the FBI seized all of his papers and research. Why?
Today, we accomplished nothing. I made it, not a thing. And it was kinda everything. Stay 2 nights, get a $50 Best Western gift card.
Baby, you okay? Why don't you go upstairs and do that guided meditation you like?
Go do that guided meditation you like.
Find a peaceful setting and close your eyes. Imagine a white light calling you.
Hello?
Now, feel that love entering
Mayor, right? I think you're the mayor.
and emanating out from your chest.
I'm almost there.
Take a deep breath in and remember the energy you give to the universe always comes back to you.
Oh, I passed it. Bro, I'm blind as a bitch.
This is some kind of karma for what we did. What if someone saw what happened?
I can go launder money. I don't know why I'm doing that.
You need to handle this. This isn't the first time there's been violence like this in Southport. It's not going to stop.
It's not gonna stop, people.
I need to start drinking. Someone is coming after us. I need your help. I just have one question. What did you do last summer?
What did you do? Are you kidding me? They're remaking that? They're remaking that shit movie?
This place is so beautiful, it makes me want to die.
Oh, you're not who I need to see.
Why do you think the official story is that
my
they
fat
were
ass
worried this
can't
technology
do
might
that.
fall into enemy hands during World War II, and then there's a conspiracy theory which probably isn't real, but who knows. The theory is that they wanted to suppress his free energy discoveries that threatened the power of the electric monopolies, which there is also evidence that conspiracy theory is real in the way our current market works. And it isn't just with electricity, it's with everything. Everybody always wants control. It's cheaper to buy and acquire than it is to create anew. And if you can't, and if something is so powerful that you can't even acquire it because the guy doesn't ever want to get rid of it, and you can't create it yourself,
Peter.
you have to get rid of it. You have to just get rid of it totally.
What is up, bitch?
Did with all
I'm gonna buy drugs.
Goods, which that's my opinion. I'm an amateur when
Fuck
it comes
you, Peter.
to the free market and how things work, and I'm not a scientist, nor am I a genius, but it seems like that makes sense. This is a bit of a side point, but it is somewhat intriguing. John G. Trump, mentioned him already. Donald Trump's uncle was the MIT scientist tasked with examining Tesla's papers for the government. That's extremely interesting. I mentioned this is where things kind of derail a little bit, get a little more wild. You're going to have to stay with me here. There's a novel that released in November of 2024 called Tesla and the Pyramid. This novel is science fiction.
Ooh, these motherfuckers are trying
me. You go to the
me.
fellow's Twitter page and you look at this stuff. Some of this is too plausible and interesting and fascinating to be just blatant science fiction. If you read this to me and said this is all true, I really wouldn't even be surprised, which is messed up. But it claims John G. Trump seized Tesla's exotic zero-point energy and scalar physics research, which, by the way, still remains classified to this day, and that is why we still don't have free energy potentially today, in spite of Tesla demonstrating it, that it was possible over a century ago, and Dr. Parkenstein doing the exact same thing, just on a smaller scale. And the explanation in the novel in regard to the pyramids is why mainstream archaeology has resisted alternative theories in regard to the pyramids and their purpose, in spite of mounting evidence that they were probably more than just tombs. Which it makes sense that they're just tombs too. No, you know, I'm the worst devil's advocate because I'm really a devil's advocate for all sides. To believe the craziest shit, and if you show me evidence, I will believe it. Just show me. Just show
him the evidence, and he'll believe it, man.
Wouldn't be surprised either way. Let's talk a little bit more about this novel. By the way, I'll have a link to it down below. This is the strangest part of this video. Tesla in the pyramid. Some people believe that this could potentially be a form of soft disclosure, which is the revealing of classified information through fiction to kind of familiarize people with an idea, and then you disclose, and then
here, take $3,000.
That's what people believe are happening.
You know what? Just because.
TikTok. Swipe, TikTok. It's an alien. It'd be worse if it was like a sign.
Oh yeah, she needs
where there's
customers.
just an alien there. Oh God! I'm not going to go to work tomorrow. But instead, the government's like, there are unidentified flying objects, but they're humans. Don't worry. And then they're like, well, maybe they're not humans. Maybe they're aliens. But we don't know where they came from. And then we're like, well, what about the ones in the 90s? So that's kind of soft disclosure. The government has been known to do that in the past, and it's just like a way to prevent hysteria. Anyways, back to the novel. It quietly dropped on November 16th, 2024 with very little fanfare. And 48 hours later, energy orbs started appearing in New Jersey across the river from Tesla's old residence. Coincidence? Yes. The book features a Cybertruck being demolished at a pyramid, and shortly after the publication, a real Cybertruck exploded near a pyramid-shaped building in Las Vegas. Coincidence? Probably as well. Also, the author's last name is Brown, which is a color, and the same last name as Townsend Brown, a Caltech pioneer in exotic energy research who developed the asymmetrical capacitor that zero-point energy theorists claim could revolutionize civilization. So, you know, the points are, he's kind of like the John G. Trump to Donald. He's kind of like that. He's like the Donald Trump to John G. Trump. Even more bizarrely, the novel predicted a scan would reveal a stairway 2 miles underground Giza. And in March 2025, a team of researchers led by Corrado Malanga and Filippo Biondi held a press conference claiming to have discovered underground structures beneath the Giza Plateau. They claim that their synthetic aperture radar, aka SAR scans, revealed vertical cylinders or shafts descending approximately 2,100 feet, about 640 meters underground with spiral pathways, which that's crazy as well. Now, there are a lot of haters who are saying that that's not true and you can't actually send that stuff and you can't find that stuff out down below the earth and all that shit. And I say,
in Chicago, we do things our own way. We're kind of known for it. We go bigger, better, bolder. So embrace the moment, Chicago style. Here we turn it all the way up. From our acclaimed architecture, sparkling waterfronts, to our diverse food scene and 77 vibrant neighborhoods. Showing up means showing out. So do your summer right. Make it Chicago style.
Worry about your squiggle distance, all right, bitches, and your zigzag amplitude or whatever the fuck is going on in here. The novel's epilogue, set 6 months after the main events, describes a world transformed by Tesla's rediscovered technology. And in this future, pyramid structures around the world have shaken to life, providing unlimited clean energy and making humanity a Type 4 civilization on the Kardashev scale, which is that amazing science fiction idea of civilizations and their levels of technology and whether or not they'll ever actually break out of the chains that bind them. The epilogue also mentions Project Tesla building new pyramids across the world, suggesting humanity has rediscovered ancient knowledge that has been repeatedly lost. So, is it just science fiction? Probably. Or is it a really smart guy who wrote a very compelling story?
Damn, this car can't
was
drive.
pulling from a mountain of information and evidence that people really wish was true, and who knows? Maybe it is. I ironically say I want you guys to comment down below on that one. Seriously, what do you think about this? Because I read the book. It's 460 some pages, something like that. It's very interesting. Anyways, let's talk about a Bosnian pyramid conspiracy. The Bosnian pyramids. These are hills that some researchers claim are actually the largest and oldest pyramids on Earth. This is according to our old buddy from earlier. According to him, these structures function as ionizers that continue to operate thousands of years after being built. His quote, "Bosnian pyramids are covered in green vegetation, and landscape around them is marked with green valleys with plenty of beneficial negative electric charges which come from under the pyramids." Continuous ionization of the atmosphere has preserved local ecosystems, and in contrast, Zujic notes that the Egyptian pyramids are surrounded by deserts, suggesting they may no longer be functioning as designed. If this is true, if the Bosnian pyramid thing is true, which probably isn't, but if it is, it suggests that the builders of the pyramids possess technology even more advanced than Tesla's technology. All this information is so interesting and remarkable, and it's unbelievable that it isn't talked about a little bit more. I'm glad this book came out. It's a great read. It's a great read. I recommend going and picking it up. It seems like there's some really odd coincidences. And sure, it could all be coincidence. Causation doesn't equal correlation, all that stuff. I get it. But what's more fun is believing in fairy tales.
All right. So for this cocaine,
Anyways,
I gotta
thanks
come
a lot
up
for
with
watching. If you
one
enjoyed, press the like button
specific strain.
down below and join the Gump Club. Go to gump.club to get exclusive behind-the-scenes access to footage. I record a beginning chunk and an end chunk of every single video,
let's
which
get
is
it
more
cooking.
content. And we cut way less out. We leave more edge in videos on the Gump Club cuts, and it massively supports the channel. Too Late Show, do a live show every week where we have guests, musical guests, and all sorts of really cool stuff. And then main channel where we do drama, slop, and some conspiracy stuff. I want to do more conspiracy stuff, I think. So anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Coors Banquet, the same brewing tradition since 1873. Start your legacy.
Should know that. Now, speaking of aliens, is that what's going on in the Book of Enoch?
Okay.
Most of the flood myths start the same way, with a warning from a godlike figure, and they end the same way, with a godlike figure helping restart civilization. Now, I can't definitively prove that this is true. Nobody can. But if we keep pressuring our governments about UAPs and UFOs, we may eventually get some answers. Humanity did take a leap forward in technology many thousands of years ago, and maybe those ancient humans had
We'll
help.
make it a 6 stack.
Enoch physically goes to a place that sounds like a spaceship. The prophet Elijah also talks about riding a chariot of fire.
Okay, that's a cool name.
What?
I thought you were going to sing it again.
Well, now I don't wanna.
Elijah talks about riding a chariot of fire over the earth with a human-like being. Elijah is amazed by the sound of the vehicle and how fast it moves. Other cultures and religions have similar stories. Muhammad ascends to heaven and meets Allah before returning to earth. In Hinduism, Arjuna is taken to heaven and lives there for a few years before coming back down. There are many more of these myths, but are they myths? Maybe these things did actually happen, but they're written down as myths because the technology is so far ahead of what existed at the time. Maybe these were visitations and abductions. There's a tribe in West Africa called the Dogon, and there are about 100,000 of them who mostly live in caves and cliffs. They're still a primitive people. The Dogon religion says that long ago, they were visited by aliens from the Sirius star system. These aliens told the Dogon that they helped the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Sumerians with their civilizations. But what's really amazing is the Dogon are aware of the star Sirius B, which the tribe calls Potolo. Sirius B is invisible to the naked eye. It was first discovered in 1862. But the Dogon people had no telescopes. They still don't. Yet not only were they aware of the star Sirius B, they knew it was a white dwarf companion star to the much brighter Sirius A. The Dogon knew the length of Sirius B's orbit in years. They knew the shape of its orbit. They knew it was a dense star. They relayed all this information to a visiting anthropologist in the 1930s. They even said there's a third star in the Sirius system, but there wasn't. Until there was. In 1995, a study concluded that a third companion star exists. More recent studies aren't so sure, but the Dogon people are. Allegedly, the Dogon were also aware of Jupiter's moons and Saturn's rings. Now, skeptics like to poke holes in the Dogon story, and I think that's fine. Like the Dogon were wrong about the number of Jupiter's moons. But they were right about Sirius B. The story of Enoch seems to be based on ancient Sumerian stories, like a lot of the Bible is. When people talk about the Book of Enoch, they're referring to what's officially called First Enoch, because there are 3 books. Biblical scholars consider the books of Enoch pseudepigrapha, that is, a biblical work that falsely claims authorship by a biblical character. That doesn't mean the books of Enoch weren't known or weren't important. In fact, First Enoch is quoted in Jude 14 through 15. Enoch was known and was important, but the book is not considered inspired by God and therefore is apocryphal and not part of canon.
Still a page turner.
Oh yeah, it's a good read. Now, some parts of Enoch are said to have been written later to expand on stories from the Bible, like the birth of Noah and Enoch's visit to heaven. These were interesting characters and people wanted to learn more. So someone, or many someones, we don't know who, just wrote more.
It's like Bible fan fiction.
It's exactly like that. But different religions and denominations are going to have different interpretations. Remember, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church says the book is canon, and that church has been around for almost 3,000 years. Some Christians think reading the book is heresy, a crime against the church. But most scholars consider the Book of Enoch an important text that gives additional insight into the lives and beliefs of the people living at the time. Honestly, whether the Book of Enoch is canon or not, that's not important to me. It's an interesting academic discussion. As you know, I'm not religious, but I am fascinated by and have great respect for religions, all religions. I enjoy the stories, and for the most part, I think they teach good lessons. I'm more into fishes and loaves than fire and brimstone, but that's just my taste. But I know I'm going to hear it in the comments. Every time I do a religious story, I get attacked. In the comments, there's going to be people screaming at me in all caps to take Jesus into my heart or I'm going to hell. If that's what you believe, that's okay. I don't believe that. I don't know what happens after we die. I'm inclined to say nothing, just black. But there's a big piece of my heart that really wants to be wrong. Because when I finally pass on and walk down that tunnel, if I'm greeted by family and friends long past, and I find myself standing at the pearly gates, the first words out of my mouth are going to be, thank God.
Thank God. Wait, no.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. My name is AJ. That's Hecklefish.
Peace be unto the human. Grateful am I for thine eyes that have watched and thine ears that have heard.
This has been the Y-Files. If you had fun or learned anything, do him a favor, subscribe, comment, like, share. Hitting the buttons really helps us out. And like most topics we cover on the channel, today's was recommended by you. So if there's a story you'd like to see or learn more about, go to theyfiles.com/tips. And remember, the Y-Files is also a podcast. Twice a week, I post deep dives into the stories we cover here on the channel. I also post episodes that wouldn't be allowed on the channel. It's called the Y-Files Operation Podcast, and it's available everywhere you get your podcasts. Now, if you need more Y-Files in your life, because who doesn't, check out our Discord server. There are thousands of people. I think we're up to 35,000 members. Well, there's thousands of people on there 24/7, and they're into the same weird stuff that we are. It's a great community, it's a lot of fun, and it's free to join. Now, special thanks to our patrons who make this channel possible. Every episode is dedicated to you, and as you know, I could not do this without your support, so thank you. And if you'd like to support the channel, we'd love you to become a member on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to perks like you see the videos early with no commercials, you get access to merch only available to members, plus you get 2 private live streams every week just for you. Another great way to support the channel is grab something from the Y-File store.
Come forth and partake in our wares, for in your hands they shall find purpose, and through your stewardship their journey shall be fulfilled.
What does that mean?
Grab a Hecklefish t-shirt, or a fistable mug, or a deck of go Hecklefish cards, or a hookie, or one of those, not a hookie, a hoodie, or one of those squeezy stuffed animal Hecklefish tongue-and-down fish toy.
That's gonna do it. Until next time, be safe, be kind, and know that you are appreciated.
He was smart, and he was friendly. The kind of guy that you would trust to walk you home. And one night, he would leave a bar, alone, and he would disappear into the dark. And 6 weeks later, his body would be found in a river. No sign of a struggle, no suspects, just a smiley face painted on a wall nearby. And then, it happened again, and again, and again. 40 times across 11 states. So are these all just tragic coincidences? A collective hallucination, maybe? Or are we staring straight into the face of America's most ignored serial killer? Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, intellectual, beautiful, I screwed it up. I'm not redoing it. And anyway, today we are talking about an infamous case, very highly recommended in the comments. So here we are today. We're going to be talking about the smiley face murders. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into this ignored case together. McNeil was 21 years old, and he was a junior at Fordham University, and he was majoring in accounting. And he was known for his very clean-cut appearance, his social ease, and his ambition. After all, he wanted to join the FBI after graduation. Not an easy feat. And his friends would describe him as confident and very well-liked. Just an all-around great guy. And his roommates would even call him a real ladies' man. But on the night of February 16th, 1997, Patrick would go out with his friends to a bar on Manhattan's Upper East Side, something he did on a pretty regular basis. And this bar was called the Dapper Dog, a very popular Fordham hangout. So Patrick would go out with his friends and hang out at the bar, but at some point during the night, he started to feel pretty sick. And witnesses would recall seeing him actually vomiting in the bathroom. So he eventually decided to leave the bar, telling his friends that he would just head back to the campus by subway by himself. So he would say goodbye to all of his friends, but one of his friends actually said that he was going to join him, so he would go outside and wait for his friend. But he would actually just never show up outside, so he just thought, okay, he probably just wants to stay at the bar, so I'm just gonna go alone. Which, as a woman, it's just something we just wouldn't do, you know? Not something we do is leave alone, but as a man, pretty normal and pretty common. And what happened next has been the subject of speculation for over 2 decades. So eyewitnesses on 2nd Avenue reported seeing Patrick stumbling along the sidewalk, clearly intoxicated, because he was just at a bar. But they also saw something else, and that was a double-parked vehicle. And this vehicle started to slowly trail him, matching his pace, and even turning when he turned. Just creepy as hell. And Patrick would be last seen near East 90th Street, heading toward the direction of the East River. And at this point, by witness accounts, the car was still following him. And after that, Patrick McNeil would never be seen alive again. So obviously his family would notice that Patrick went missing, and they would call it into the police. So the NYPD and his family and countless volunteers in New York searched tirelessly for Patrick, and they would distribute over 10,000 posters, turning it into one of the city's most famous missing persons cases. But weeks and weeks would pass, and then 50 days later, on April 7th, 1997, his body would be found floating in the East River near a pier in Brooklyn, which was roughly 12 miles from where he was last seen. And he would be found wearing only jeans and socks, floating face up in the water, which is uncommon for accidental drownings. And the medical examiner listed the cause of death as drowning. The manner of death undetermined, and his blood alcohol content was actually recorded at 0.16, which is twice the legal limit to drive. But he wasn't driving, he was just walking. But there was unusual details that stood out, because despite the cold temperatures, fly larvae were discovered on the body, which is an anomaly since insect activity is typically dormant in winter months. Dr. Cyril Wett would even quote to say,
"I'm saying that the fly larvae have been laid in the groin area.
Big
It's an
fruit?
indoor fly. It could not have been an outdoor fly. It was an indoor fly, and the larvae were there, did not move ahead into the later stage. So we have a body that was already dead before it was placed in the water. I would call it homicide. Yes."
And there were also reported signs that Patrick may have been bound and possibly burned before being placed in the water. Retired NYPD detective Kevin Gannon, who worked this case, would later state that he believed Patrick McNeil had been abducted, held for an extended period of time, and then was murdered, and that he wasn't just a simple victim of accidental drowning. But Patrick's case would just close. But Kevin Gannon's investigation had only just begun, and soon he would find other young men with eerily similar profiles who also vanished near water, who were also ruled as just drownings, but were completely unexplained. So Patrick McNeil's case might have been the beginning, but it didn't end with him, because in the years that followed, similar cases began surfacing, and not just in New York, but across the country. Different cities, same victim profile, and the same tragic end. Young men in their early 20s, college students, athletes, and high performers. And in some of those cases where the bodies were found, something else appeared nearby. Something seemingly innocuous. And it was a smiley face. And then there was Lucas Homan, and he would be 21 years old when he was last seen at Oktoberfest in La Crosse, Wisconsin in September 2006. And during Oktoberfest, he would actually become separated with his friends at the festivities. And days later, his body would be found near the shore of the Mississippi River. And the autopsy would note injuries to his head, hands, and arms, as well as a footprint-shaped bruise on his forehead. And authorities would initially rule this as an accidental drowning. But near the site where he was found was another smiley face. Which, like, also with the amount of bruises on this person, doesn't it look like he was beat and held captive and then thrown in the river? The neglect in these cases is astounding. And then there was Todd Gee, and he would vanish when he was only 22 years old while attending a bonfire party in rural Michigan in June of 2005. And at the bonfire, eventually he would kind of disappear, and then he would call his friend saying, "I'm in a field," but then the call would completely drop, and he would never be heard from again, until he was found 3 weeks later with his body found in a private lake. And what's odd is that he was found upright in the water with his head and shoulders above the surface. A very just deeply unnatural position for a drowning victim. And what's also odd is that that lake had been searched previously as well. So it's almost like he was dumped in this lake later on, after the first search was done. And a toxicology screen would indicate that alcohol and antidepressants were found in his system. But he was reportedly not suffering from any sort of depression at the time. But something else didn't add up, because his body showed minimal decomposition, which was extremely unusual given that it would have been present if he actually died on the day of his disappearance, leading experts to question whether he had been in the water the entire time, or whether he had been somewhere else before he had died. And to boot, nearby on a tree was, you guessed it, a painted smiley face. Tommy Booth was 24 when he disappeared from a bar in Woodland, Pennsylvania on January 19th, 2008. And he was celebrating a friend's 21st birthday on that night. And surveillance cameras would show that Tommy would enter the bar, but he would never leave. And 2 weeks later, his body would be discovered in a creek behind the bar. And he would be found with full rigor mortis, which usually dissipates somewhere between 24 to 36 hours after death. And for those of you who don't know what rigor mortis is, it's when the body gets really stiff after death, like almost immovable. And this actually suggested that he hadn't been in the water for the full duration of his disappearance. And spray painted nearby, someone had left an eerie smiley face. And then there was William Hurley, a 24-year-old Navy veteran who disappeared after leaving a Boston Bruins game on October of 2009. Before he left, he would call his fiancée for a ride, but when she arrived shortly after, he was gone. And 6 days later, his body was recovered from the Charles River. And an autopsy found blunt force trauma to his head, eye socket, and his leg. And toxicology revealed something else, which was alcohol and GHB, a drug often used to incapacitate victims. And his death would be ruled an undetermined drowning. And once again, there was a smiley face near the river. And then there was 21-year-old Chris Jenkins. He was a student at the University of Minnesota, and on Halloween night, 2002, he left a bar in downtown Minneapolis and was never seen again. And 4 months later, his body would be recovered from the Mississippi River, and he was still fully dressed in his Halloween costume. So authorities initially ruled this as an accidental drowning. But in 2006, after years of pressure from his family, the Minneapolis Police Department reclassified his death as a homicide. It's just so sad that, like, the family had to pressure the police into considering this case as a homicide. Like, do your f***ing job. And to Detective Kevin Gannon, the detective who was on Patrick McNeil's case, who was the first case, this wasn't just a win for the family. It was sort of validation. Proof that one of the earlier cases had been mishandled, and that it could fit the pattern he had begun tracking. Because one case is a tragedy, and two is maybe a coincidence. But when young men across the country begin vanishing under almost identical circumstances, after nights out drinking, always found in water, often with smiley face graffiti nearby, at what point do you stop calling it chance? And that is the exact question retired detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, who actually joined the Gannon investigation, were asking. Because they weren't seeing isolated drownings. They were seeing a pattern emerge. A mark, a symbol, a face. And sometimes it was large and cartoonish, and other times it was kind of hastily scrawled, but it was seemingly always nearby and always just out of place enough to feel wrong. But to most investigators, these were just coincidences, because graffiti is, in fact, pretty much everywhere, and smiley faces are extremely common. But to Gannon and Duarte, they were signatures, though they weren't left at every single crime scene, so they were not predictable, but seemingly intentional, enough to at least suggest taunting or a pattern or a ritual. So by the mid-2000s, what started as a lingering suspicion had grown into something far more disturbing. And retired NYPD detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte weren't just reviewing cold cases at this point. They were tracking the pattern, as I said before. And this pattern spanned dozens of cities, and it was a pattern that no one else seemed to be seeing for some reason. So by this point, the team had compiled a list of over 40 young men, and all of them were found in bodies of water and ruled as drownings, and all just deemed accidents. But to Gannon and Duarte, the similarities were just impossible to ignore. But to police departments, they were just unrelated tragedies. So Gannon and Duarte started to put all of these pieces together, and a map started to take shape. And the shape was not random. And to make sense of it, the team needed more than investigative instinct. They needed someone who could look at the data and explain from the outside. And that's when Professor Dr. Lee Gilbertson came into the picture. He was a criminal justice professor and expert in organized criminal behavior from St. Cloud University in Minnesota. And Gilbertson hadn't necessarily set out to solve the case. In fact, his introduction actually came through the classroom, because he would actually assign the deaths of several young men as a case study for a graduate course in criminal profiling. So at first, it was just academic curiosity, because the cases themselves were bizarre, but they were also very distant. Until, of course, the similarities began to pile up. So then came the phone call, and detectives Gannon and Duarte actually saw the project online and called them to collaborate. And when Gilbertson first initially examined the case files, he didn't just rush to judgment, which I think is good. He approached this theory with great caution, constantly looking for holes and inconsistencies. So he wasn't necessarily trying to prove their point. He was just trying to understand it at this point. But he would say patterns were there. There was the same profile, same behaviors, and same aftermath. And the most telling, actually, was the same terrain, because Gilbertson saw what the others different, and that was that the geography actually might be the key, because the victims weren't being found in obscure locations. They were actually being found inside of patterns, along specific river paths in proximity to college towns and within certain travel corridors. So he argued that the locations actually weren't accidental. They were deliberately chosen. So Gilbertson would pose a theory of his own, one even darker than the idea of a lone serial killer, because he claimed that this didn't look like it was the work of one person, but instead looked like the work of a network. So according to Gilbertson, these cases didn't resemble a serial killer's hunting ground, but a disturbed model more akin to a gang or cell-based activity. Essentially, multiple individuals, which is just even more terrifying and horrible. And he would suggest that they were operating independently, but they were also connected in some way. And they would select targets based off of certain criteria, leaving behind obscure, possibly symbolic marks, the smiley face. But they hadn't quite found something to link it all together at this point. And Gannon and Gilbertson began applying geographical profiling to new cases. So they would locate high-risk areas, tracing victim movements, analyzing proximity to waterways, bars, and surveillance blind spots. So what they were building wasn't just a theory, but it was a map. And in the very center of the map, a crude, mocking symbol. One that kept appearing near the water, and one that would give this theory its name. You guessed it, smiley face. But as I was saying before, the symbol wasn't consistent in design. There was no single style, no brand-like stamp that screamed serial killer. Like a lot of serial killers we go through, they have a very specific MO, and they do certain rituals like leaving marks or taking specific items. And in this case, it's a smiley face, but since it's not consistent, it really doesn't seem like it's one person. But this kind of just added to the unease, because smiley faces were showing up within walking distance of recovery sites, often within 20 feet. But again, it wasn't at every single scene, but in just enough of them to start to raise questions. So in the cases like Tommy, Todd, William, and Lucas, the smiley face was there. And sometimes they weren't alone, because Gannon's team claimed that they actually found additional undisclosed markings at some of the sites. Some were runes, arrows, and abstract figures. But they chose to not release those symbols publicly because they didn't want to inspire copycats or alert who was ever behind it. Because the team believed that these symbols were kind of a mocking calling card. And in interviews and briefings, Gannon started to refer to the perpetrators, or whoever they were, as part of a syndicate, which is a loose network of individuals or cells possibly communicating across cities. And he suspected that the group selected victims with great care, targeting young men based on profile, vulnerability, and opportunity. And each act carried out in a different place. Each crime was dressed as an accident, and each message was tagged with a smile. So at this point, the press just needed a name, of course, and soon they would have one: the Smiley Face Killers. So what started as just a theory was now a brand, and one that would spread across the internet. To message boards, true crime communities, and headline after headline, it would just keep coming up. the smiley-faced killers. Behind that eerie nickname was still a chilling question. If this was real, and if someone was really killing young men across the country and leaving behind this cryptic grin, how had no one stopped them at this point? Or properly investigated them, besides Ganon and Duarte, who were just doing this as, like, something on their off time, basically. So by the time Ganon's team began to speak publicly about the smiley-faced killer theory, it had already ignited quite the controversy. And not because of what was known, but because of what was missing. Because the idea of a hidden network stalking and abducting young men across multiple states was pretty fucking bold. Because it challenged the very framework most law enforcement agencies used to understand violent crimes. And that made people very uneasy. Naturally. And in precincts and college campuses and media circles, a quiet wave of skepticism began to ripple beneath the surface. Because critics weren't just questioning the conclusion, they were questioning the very foundation of the theory itself. And one of the first criticisms was the symbol, the smiley face. Because yes, smiley face graffiti had been found near some of the recovery sites, but it was also kinda everywhere else. I can't, like, every time I've seen graffiti, there is a smiley face somewhere in there. And they're on bridges and underpasses, skate parks, and alleyways, where graffiti is very prominent to begin with. And urban graffiti wasn't a rare thing. And the smiley face, like I said before, was arguably the most universal symbol on Earth. So to many, connecting it to the murders felt like seeing faces in clouds. If you looked hard enough, you're gonna see a face. Might be a really scary face or something. I've seen some weird shit in clouds, I'll tell you what. But you'll see it if you're looking for it. And there was the lack of hard evidence. There was no murder weapons, no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses, and no direct links between the victims themselves. And each case, when viewed in isolation, could be explained away. It was a college-age man, a night of drinking, a body in a river. Tragic, yes, but to most authorities, not suspicious. And the profiles, though, were consistent, but so were their environments. College towns, winter weather, nightlife culture, waterfronts, intoxication, and to skeptics, that wasn't conspiracy, that was just a risk. And even some within law enforcement began to question whether Ganon's team was chasing shadows at this point. Because they saw the theory built on circumstantial links, bound together by grief and frustration and a deeply human desire to make sense of senseless death. Because to them, it wasn't murder. It wasn't ritual. It wasn't misinterpretation. It was just accidents. So even as the theory began to catch the public's eye, behind the scenes, it was already being quietly dismissed. But Ganon and his team were not backing down. Because for every case, critics explained away, but that's when another one surfaced. So Kevin Ganon and Anthony Duarte had spent years compiling case files, mapping location, and connecting the dots no one else seemed to see. Because they really believed they had uncovered one of the most overlooked serial crime patterns in American history. But at this point, it wasn't enough to believe it. And they needed others to see it too. So they went national, baby. The detectives would appear on ABC's Good Morning America, laying out their investigation to a national live audience. Then, their theory was featured on CNN, where Ganon reiterated the most chilling possibility of all. We believe they're being murdered. And then Duarte added, water destroys evidence. It's the perfect crime. But they didn't name any suspects at this point. And they didn't point fingers, but they posed a terrifying question to millions of viewers. What if these aren't accidents? And what if someone or some group is hunting young men across the country? And the media would take immediate notice. And they would latch on to the smiley face killers because it was eerie, it was marketable, it was viral. And that's when public opinion started to light up again. So true crime fans, amateur sleuths, grieving families began to all re-examine the old cases with fresh eyes. Was there a pattern that no one noticed? Was there a link between their loss and someone else's? And for many, Ganon and Duarte had pulled back the curtain on a dark truth. But for others, they'd stepped into the spotlight with a story too far-fetched to believe. So there were basically two parties. Either you believed it or you didn't. And as their theory started to make headlines, they also began to adopt some enemies. And the detectives, being in this field for so long, had expected some critics. But what they didn't expect was how loud and how fast it would grow. Because the more that Ganon and Duarte spoke, the more resistance they triggered from within the very world that they came from, which was law enforcement, forensic experts, and eventually the big guy on campus, the FBI. And the FBI would push back and put out a statement. And it would say,
over the past several years, law enforcement and FBI have received information about young college-aged men who were found deceased in rivers in the Midwest. The FBI has reviewed the information about the victims provided by 2 retired police detectives who have dubbed these incidents the smiley face murders and interviewed an individual who provided information to the detectives. To date, we have not developed any evidence to support the links between these tragic deaths or any evidence substantiating the theory that these deaths are the work of a serial killer or killers. The vast majority of these instances appear to be alcohol-related drownings. The FBI will continue to work with the local police in the affected areas to provide support as requested. And this was said Supervisory Special Agent Richard J. Kolko, Washington, D.C.
So that was on April 29th, 2008, and it was very rare for the FBI to put out public statements. But they would dismantle this case in just a few sentences. So it was swift, and it cut directly through the heart of the smiley face killer theory. So the Bureau's position was pretty clear. There was no suspects, no motive, and no forensic evidence linking the cases. So to federal investigators, it wasn't a case. It was basically just a story. And from their perspective, it just didn't hold up. But Gannon, my guy, was not convinced. Guy was persistent as hell, I will give him that. And he would actually fire back at the FBI publicly, accusing the FBI of ignoring key inconsistencies in the cases, which included toxicology reports, signs of staging, unusual injuries, and bodies recovered in places that had already been searched, which we already knew. And it was already pretty suspicious. And Gannon believed that if the FBI actually sat down with them and actually looked at the evidence that they collected, they wouldn't have actually made that statement. Because to him, the Bureau hadn't disproven the theory at all. They basically just dismissed it without digging any deeper. But some of the loudest voices in opposition were the experts. It wasn't conspiracy theorists, it wasn't internet sleuths, but very seasoned criminal profilers, detectives, and forensic psychologists, many of whom have worked on serial cases. And Dr. Chris Mohandi, a respected forensic psychologist who personally investigated the 2002 death of Christopher Jenkins, saw no evidence of foul play. He would point to inconsistencies in the graffiti as a key problem because the smiley faces varied widely in shape, size, and style. Some were cartoonish, others minimal, and some had been there for years. So to Chris, this wasn't a calling card, it was just urban noise. But raising my hand here, the smiley face might have nothing to do with it, and that's like I think the smiley face part is actually a very small part of it. It's how similar these deaths are. That's just me, though. But anyway, then we have Nanette Toosby, a former LAPD detective, who echoed those same concerns. And she would note that in many of the cases, the locations where the bodies were found and the locations of any graffiti were not close to each other. And she also argued that a serial killer spanning more than 27 years and state lines without any sort of trail seemed unlikely, which they didn't claim. They claimed that it wasn't one person, so. Okay, Nanette. I'm being an asshole. Anyway, but then came Pat Brown, a veteran criminal profiler, and her take was even more blunt. She basically just called it ludicrous. Like, actually, she used the word ludicrous. Luda and the smiley faces were just a red herring, and she said, if you look in any area 5 miles square, I bet you could find a smiley face, which I agree. I do agree with that. Like, they're all really fixating on the smiley face thing, but I really don't think that's the point. I think there's just more than that. That a lot of these deaths look like foul play. I think we should look into that. Stop looking at the smiley face. But the Center for Homicide Research, a Minneapolis-based organization focused on data-driven crime studies, went one step further. And they published a full-length report aiming to scientifically refute the smiley face killing theory. And the argument included this: no proof that smiley faces were painted at or immediately after the time of killing. Graffiti is everywhere. Thanks, Center for Homicide Research. No discernible criteria has been stated for how close the smiley faces must be in proximity to the death site. No evidence of victim trauma. What? The way that intoxicated men accidentally fall into bodies of water is well known and documented. That is fair. They concluded the theory most likely was a result of observational bias. You basically see what you want to see. There is fact in that. I do think that personally. And they thought it was also a result of groupthink. Basically, people influenced by an authority figure, aka prominent lead homicide detective from New York, which has the largest city of population. And these posed a risk of distracting attention from the actual causes of death. But even local law enforcement had their doubts. Because in La Crosse, Wisconsin, a city where 8 separate cases were connected to the theory, police issued a very clear response. The deaths were accidental drownings, there was no evidence of homicide, and there was no relevant smiley face graffiti found near the site. So to them, it was a problem of alcohol, geography, and tragedy, not of conspiracy. So the message from experts was very clear. The theory supposedly wasn't supported by any evidence and was built basically just on shaky foundation. And they were trying to connect dots that didn't necessarily connect at all. But for Gannon's team, persistent guy, it wasn't about what the experts believed. It was about what was happening. And they were determined to uncover more evidence. Because long after criticism came and went, the bodies were still showing up. So Dakota was 23 years old. He was a graduate student of Duquesne University with a promising future. He was very bright and very responsible and not the kind of person who just vanishes without a trace and who vanishes with no reason. But on January 25th, 2017, Dakota went out with friends in downtown Pittsburgh. And it was just a casual night out, just drinks after a very normal day. Nothing unusual for him. But surveillance footage later showed him walking alone through Katz Plaza, and then down a nearby alley toward Fort Duquesne Boulevard. And that would be the last time he was seen alive. And for 40 days, Dakota was just missing. And the family would just beg the public for information, and the searches would intensify. And then he would finally be found. So on March 6th, his body was surfaced in the Ohio River, near Interstate 79 Bridge over Neville Island, just miles away from where he was last seen. And the Allegheny County Medical Examiner ruled it an accidental drowning. There was no trauma, no foul play suspected, and the case was just closed. But Dakota's family did not accept that, especially his mother, Pamela James, because she believed that there was no way he ended up in the river on his own. And that's when Dr. Sewell Wecht, a renowned forensic psychologist, would enter. And he would go on to review Dakota's case, and he would find it deeply, deeply troubling. And he would make these notes. Minimal decomposition inconsistent with traveling over 10 miles and 40 days in a river, supposedly through a dam as well. Ligature marks around the neck suggesting possible strangulation, not mentioned in the autopsy at all, and the distinct difference in coloration of the fingernail beds of the 4th and 5th fingers on both the right and left hands, which certainly would be consistent with someone reaching up and trying to release the pressure from a ligature that is being applied around the neck. So to Wecht, this wasn't just a drowning. It looked more like a staged crime scene. But the police just stood by their ruling. There was no suspects, no evidence of abduction, and no witnesses. Which of course just means he wasn't murdered. Just because you haven't found anything yet, they're like, it was an accident. We can't find anything. You look? Let me look. Let me look really quick. One sec. No, case closed. It was an accident. Let's go get lunch. Like, the amount of neglect in these cases, it is just so sad, so disheartening, especially for these families just wanting answers as to why their child, their brother, their uncle, whoever went missing and just turned up dead, they're just being pushed aside. It's disgusting. And obviously, to Dakota's family, this was not a tragic accident. They believed it was something else, something much darker. And for those who had been following the smiley face killer theory for years, the details felt hauntingly familiar. So Gannon, once again, would assemble his team. It's like the Avengers, I love it. Including former members Anthony Duarte and Dr. Lee Gilbertson. But this time they added a fellow retired NYPD detective, Michael Donovan. So with fresh eyes and newer tools, the team brought something to the table that most local departments lacked. which was advanced forensic methods, digital reconstruction, and geographic profiling. Because to them, this wasn't about just chasing hunches, it was about following the data and letting digital trail speak for itself. And in several cases, they conducted detailed reviews of cell phone records, GPS logs, and account activity. And these discoveries would form a foundation for a brand new light to be shone on the smiley face killer theory. But more on that in a moment. So in the early days, the symbol was simple. A smiley face, crude, cartoonish, and sprayed onto bridges, tunnels, walls, and riverbanks. And to some, it was just graffiti. But to others, it was a signature. But as the cases mounted, the investigators began to notice something unsettling, and that was the symbol was evolving. Because the smiley face kind of shifted from concrete to code. And they began to theorize that the symbol was no longer limited to paint cans and underpasses. It had become something more abstract. A digital marker passed through usernames, avatars, and encrypted online communities. And it was a way of signaling identity or allegiance. And then they would find something that changed everything. Because during the course of re-investigation, the team was handed a URL. And the URL had led them not to the surface web, but to something far more concealed. A dark web portal. Yep. We're getting real dark. And the site was not public, so this couldn't be accessed by accident. And before granting entry, it demanded something unexpected, which was webcam verification. And to proceed, they would need to show their faces, which again is just terrifying. And this was a step that no investigator could afford to take, so they would back off. But what lay beyond that login screen has haunted them ever since. And from that moment on, the Gilbertson Networks theory felt much stronger. But this dark web portal helped paint a picture. It was decentralized, anonymous, operating in cells across various cities. And each cell, they believed, composed of dozens of individuals, capable of recruiting, surveilling, and communicating without leaving a trail at all. And if true, it would explain the uniformity of the victims, and the precision of the disappearances, and the near total absence of forensic evidence. So the recruitment, they theorized, occurred through encrypted communication. So these weren't just thrill kills, they were coordinated acts, according to Gannon and his team. And the smiley face, it wasn't just to taunt anymore, it was a banner. And to critics, this all just sounded like folklore, digital age myth-making wrapped in fear. But to Gannon's team, it made sense of what nothing else could explain. How could the same kind of victim disappear under the same circumstances in city after city, year after year, without a single suspect ever being caught, even though foul play was present in some of the murders? So if the killings were coordinated behind the screen, then maybe the face on the wall wasn't just a signature. Maybe it was just watching you back. So though the cases were alive and well with Gannon and his team, and, of course, the victims' families, the smiley face killer theory had lost a bit of steam over the years, and critics said that it had been debunked, and the media just moved on, like they always do. So the cases just remained cold. But in 2019, the theory returned, and this time it was through a television screen. Because remember that brand new light that I mentioned? This was it. Because the Oxygen Network launched a 6-part true crime docuseries called Smiley Face Killers: The Hunt for Justice. And it followed Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte and their investigation team as they reopened some of the most controversial cases connected to the theory. And this series wasn't just a recap. It was an extension of the investigation, updated for the digital age. And each episode dove into different cases, revisiting timelines, interviewing families, and challenging the official rulings, and in some cases, revealing new details the public had never heard. And in the case of William Hurley, the Navy veteran who vanished after the Boston Bruins game, they would examine his damaged cell phone that was recovered near where he was last seen, because they suspected that the phone had actually been intentionally destroyed, just based on the way that the phone was damaged. And this was potentially to disrupt digital evidence collection. And then came the case of Dakota James, because in addition to forensic red flags raised by Dr. Cyril Wecht, including the minimal decomposition and possible ligature marks, the investigation team uncovered something very odd in Dakota's digital footprint. And it was a PayPal transaction made 2 days after his disappearance. So to Gannon and his team, it suggested a chilling possibility that someone maybe had access to Dakota's accounts after after he had vanished. And if this was true, he may have not been alone during that time. And in the case of Todd Gieb, who disappeared after the bonfire party in rural Michigan in 2005 and was found 3 weeks later upright in the lake, the team actually went a step further, and they would conduct a forensic decomposition study. Working with forensic biologist Dr. M. Eric Benbow, they would use a pig carcass to replicate the environment conditions of the lake where Gieb was found. And the results? Bodies left in the water for 3 weeks showed immediate insect infestation and extensive decomposition, which was far more than what was seen in Gieb's case. And to the investigators, this was very significant. It not only suggested Todd had not been in the lake for the full duration of his disappearance, but that someone may have held him elsewhere, and then the body was placed in the water after the fact. So these weren't just one-offs, they were signposts, evidence that supported what they had believed for years. And these young men weren't just falling into rivers, they were being put there. So for some, the Oxygen series breathed new life into the old myth. But for others, it served as a reminder for something far more disturbing. That after 2 decades, no one could fully explain why so many men were disappearing, only to be found in water miles from where they were last seen. But this time, the audience watching wasn't just investigators. It was millions and millions of viewers and the next wave of believers. So in the modern era, the rules for investigation have changed, and the technology that once didn't exist now might just crack the silence. And today, investigators aren't limited to witness statements and physical evidence. They have data and machines that know where we've been and what we've seen and who we were near. Because geofencing now allows authorities to pinpoint every phone in a certain radius at any given time, which is kind of scary, but also helpful in this case. And Wi-Fi logs can place victim or suspect inside a building without a single camera. And phone ping triangulation can quite literally rebuild the final minutes of life with chilling accuracy. So these tools aren't just theoretical. They've already been used in major criminal cases to secure convictions. And if applied to the drownings linked to the smiley face killing theory, they could finally reveal what happened between the time a victim vanished and where their body was found. So the next breakthrough, if it comes, may not be found at the bottom of a river, but buried in data. And for the families left behind, the answers from law enforcement were never enough. And for some, the search for truth never stopped. Like Pam James, the mother of Dakota James, has become one of the most outspoken advocates for reopening the cases, because she never accepted that her son died of accidental drowning. And even with the aforementioned evidence discovered by Gannon and Dr. Wecht, including the potential ligature marks on his neck and minimal decomposition, and despite being missing for 40 days, the Allegheny County Medical Examiner's Office refused to change the ruling. But still, Pam continues to speak out, demanding that her son's case be reopened. And she is not alone. The Homan family, the Hurley family, and more. They lost their sons under nearly identical circumstances, and they continue to call for the cases to be formally re-examined. Because for these families, the pain of losing a child had not been compounded by the feeling that no one but them wanted to look deeper. But with Gannon and his team, they looked. And what they found wasn't closure. It was contradiction, and the kind of contradictions that don't lead to peace, but just to more questions. So by now, dozens of cases have been reviewed. Autopsy reports, GPS data, surveillance footage, and digital footprints analyzed again and again. And some theories unraveled, some theories refuted, and some leads just went cold. But even after that, some patterns refused to go away. And victim after victim followed the same haunting sequence. College-age man, intelligent, athletic, and well-liked, disappearance late at night, often after leaving a bar or party. And they were found days or weeks later in a body of water with no sign of robbery, no sign of SA, and no motive. And in many cases, the victim's phone was missing or later found damaged. And then there were the geographical coincidences as well. Many of the victims were found in or near major river systems, always in proximity to nightlife, but far enough away that their last known locations raised questions. And some bodies were recovered upstream, and others in areas that had already been searched. And a few showed rigor mortis or minimal decomposition inconsistent with the official timelines. So these weren't drug dealings gone wrong, they weren't robberies, they weren't hate crimes. Nothing was taken. Nothing was left behind. And often there was no obvious reason the victim had left where they were in the first place. So why does this keep happening? But here is what the believers say. The victims fit a profile, too specific to be random. They always turn up in the same way, in water, days or weeks later, sometimes miles from where they were last seen. The condition in which the bodies are found are questionable. They're found in better condition than they should be. They have strangulation marks or burning marks, and they defy typical drowning behavior. And while the official causes of death are usually listed as accidental, many private pathologists, like Dr. Cyril Wecht, have raised concerns about potential signs of strangulation, post-mortem water entry, and other red flags overlooked in the initial autopsies. And believers point to the smiley face graffiti as a kind of ritualistic signature, although not always identical, but often close enough to raise eyebrows. And if you step back far enough, you'll also notice something chilling. These deaths aren't localized. They cover multiple states, following major water routes and appearing in clusters near college towns. And to believers, this isn't sloppy work by a serial killer. It's a network, one that's possibly been active for over 2 decades, and perhaps operating in independent cells, as Gannon and Gilbertson had theorized, capable of using digital footprints, recruiting new members, and communicating without ever being caught. And each drowning isn't just a mistake, it's a message. And the smiley face was just a symbol that says, we were here. And then we move on to the skeptic's view. So while believers say that the theory connects dots between unexplained deaths, the skeptics say the smiley face killer theory isn't a chilling discovery at all. It's just a dangerous distraction that just started with a symbol. The smiley face, the theory namesake, is one of the most common pieces of graffiti in the world. You'll find it under bridges and sidewalks and inside bathroom stalls, and the presence of a smiley face near a crime scene is statistically meaningless. There was also no consistent style, no matching handwriting, and often no photographic proof that it was even there in the first place. And then there's the victim profile. Yes, most of the men were young, white, and athletic, but so are millions of college-age men across the country. So skeptics argue this as a survivorship bias, which is basically the human tendency to notice patterns that match our expectations, while ignoring the ones that don't. And when you start with the conclusion that these men were murdered, it's easy to retrofit the evidence to support it. And the geography, critics note that nearly all the cases occurred in college towns and cities within rivers and nightlife.
Whether you're tinkering in your garage or tackling big projects, if you know the value of working with your hands, you know Harbor Freight. And you can be confident knowing that at Harbor Freight, you can get quality tools at prices that work just as hard as you do. Because the only thing more satisfying than a job well done is a job well done, well under budget. Whatever you do it for less at Harbor Freight.
Places where alcohol consumption is high and environmental hazards are very real. And the combination of drinking, cold weather, poor lighting, and water is already statistically very dangerous. And to them, the pattern isn't conspiracy, it's just a tragic probability. And the list goes on, stuff I've already gone over, but they argue that clinging to conspiracy theories can distract from the real dangers like substance abuse, mental health struggles, and unsafe environments. And by replacing those hard conversations with a villain we can't see. Because sometimes the scariest answer isn't that someone is responsible, it's that no one is. So whether you believe the smiley face killer or not, one thing is undeniable, and that is that the story leaves a mark. Not just on the families and not just on the investigators, but on all of us. Because what we're dealing with isn't just death. It's disappearance, uncertainty, and a narrative where the ending is never quite satisfying, and the facts just never align fully. And for the families and the victims, the psychological toll is compounded by more than just grief. They're mourning sons, brothers, partners, and friends. And while fighting institutions, confronting doubt, and navigating public speculation, many were told to just move on, to accept the ruling, to let it go. But how do you let go when the final chapter doesn't make any f***ing sense? How do you grieve when every detail feels just a bit off and enough to haunt you? And for law enforcement, the toll comes in a form of pressure. They fear of missing something bigger, or chasing the wrong theory, or of being accused of apathy. And for some officers, the cases remain open wounds, and for others, just statistics in a filing cabinet. And for the public, it's a lingering chill that comes with every new headline, every new name, every young man who disappears without any sort of explanation. And then there's the internet, a place where tragedy becomes theory and theory becomes obsession. And in the digital age, true crime isn't just a genre, it's a community, a conversation, and sometimes a battleground. On one side, people are desperate for justice, and on the other, skeptics demand proof. And in the middle, there's real lives and real families and real consequences. And conspiracy theories, by nature, fill the void left by uncertainty. So when the truth feels incomplete, our minds kind of just do the rest. Sometimes we find clarity, and other times we find comfort in patterns that aren't really there, potentially. But for those who have actually lost somebody, the ambiguity is the real punishment. Because when a death is ruled accidental, but everything about it feels deliberate, you don't just mourn the person you lost, you mourn the answers you'll never get. But for me, there's just a certain silence in these cases, a stillness that just doesn't feel right. And for every official report that says accidental drowning, there's a grieving family and a set of missing phone records or a toxicology screen that raises more question than it does answers. So I hope that technology can finally break this silence, because the families deserve that. But I personally do share that just gut feeling by those investigators and parents and every friend that says that wasn't like him. Because if it's all a coincidence, why does it feel so intentional? But I will leave that question to you. I'm very interested to see what you guys think about this case. I know it was a long one, but it's extremely interesting, and I know a lot of you recommended this. Thank you for recommending it. I'm happy to bring new light to this case. I think it's really important. Let me know what other cases you want me to go into down below, and until then, stay safe, and I will see your beautiful face in the next video, okay? Bye.
About an hour ago, Theo airballed the game-winning shot. But with the Zaxby sauce boss box, he's dunking all over these fools.
Welcome to Dunk City. I'm the mayor. And the sheriff.
Who's got the sauce?
Zaxby's.
It's okay.
Protect your family's dreams under our roof. American Family Insurance.
What motivates people to give up their lives, their wealth, and even their identities to a charismatic leader? How do ordinary, everyday individuals become trapped in manipulative, often dangerous belief systems? And when the illusion of a perfect world begins to break, what then? Throughout history, cults have risen and fallen, leaving behind dark stories of control, deception, and tragedy. But some of the most disturbing cases remain largely unknown to the public. So we're gonna dive deep into the rise and collapse of 3 such cults, each led by figures who promised enlightenment but delivered something far, far more sinister. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder. All things that I love to consume, and I know you do too, you sick, twisted, lovely, beautiful, intellectually minded freak. So today we are talking about just that. Cults! 3 of them. 3 of which I don't think you've heard of. And if you have, well, I don't know, don't listen? Yeah, you should listen anyway. But without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into these 3 disturbing cults together. So the first cult we're going to be talking about today is Angel's Landing. Sounds nice, right? It's not. It's not. It's the furthest thing from nice. It should be called the Devil's Landing. It's probably my worst joke. The jokes will get up from here. Go up from here for sure. And the first joke I will mention is the man named Daniel Perez, the cult leader, if you will. And he was born in Aransas Pass, Texas in 1959. And he was somewhat of an enigmatic figure with early info on his life largely undisclosed. It was difficult to find information on what he was like as a little kiddo and, and like what he was like as a young adult, what job he had, did he work at McDonald's? I don't know. The guy is a bit of a mystery, but I don't really care. because he's a giant piece of shit. But into his adulthood, he did work in Texas prisons, aviation, and maintained airplanes in the Navy. And in 1996 to 1997, he was also accused of sexual crimes against 2 young girls. Yeah, it gets bad right out the gate with this guy. This guy is like mega POS. And these girls were only 11 and 14. But these specific cases would be dismissed. Why, you ask? Because he was reported dead, but he actually wasn't. In reality, he just changed his name to Lou Castro and moved out of state. You can't do that shit now. You can't do that shit. That's crazy. I wonder how many people did that, just to like wipe their slate completely clean. It's just sick. But this is when he would start to build somewhat of a following. Not necessarily a cult at this point, but a bit of a following, a commune, if you will. So he allegedly traveled with members of his commune for several years across multiple states before finally settling into their home of Angel's Landing, Devil's Landing. And the states they would move to was Texas, the Dakotas, Missouri, Kansas, and eventually Tennessee, but that was after Angel's Landing. So Perez, or Lou Castro, at this time claimed to be a seer with the ability to see the future, you know, like That's So Raven. And you know, that seems pretty standard as a cult leader. They all claim that the doomsday is coming, they know the future because their prophet, blah, 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 bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. But he would also claim that he would need young girls to sustain his life and wanted regular access to his followers. His followers being a lot of young girls. And by access, you can draw that conclusion. Just sick. He's just a giant sicko. And there are some just heartbreaking quotes from some of the girls that endured this asshole after the fact, like after he got caught, and they were quoted saying, "While other 10-year-old girls were riding bikes or playing with dolls, I was laying naked in bed with a pillow over my head, just waiting for it to be over." And she would go on to say, "While other 13-year-old girls were getting boyfriends and holding hands, I was holding on to my secret and losing the people I loved one by one. When other 16-year-olds were experiencing their freedom of learning how to drive and planning parties with their friends, I was planning my own death every day when I drove to school." Just heartbreaking stuff. Like, this guy is just a waste of oxygen. And on top of being able to see the future, or claiming to be able to see the future and taking advantage of young girls, he also claimed to be a 1,000-year-old angel himself. What?
Lou used to tell us that he was 1,000 years old and that he was an angel himself.
Lou Castro had all of his followers believing that he was centuries old and that his body was inhabited by angels.
What? Who? Like, listen, I know everybody that, not everybody, but a lot of people that join cults are usually very lost. They have nowhere to go. They don't have a sense of self, a sense of worth. But if a little came up to me saying he could see the future, takes advantage of like young girls, and says he's a 1,000-year-old angel, I would punch him in the throat. So for future reference, do that if some guy comes up to you and says all this stuff. But it's like crazy. Just another prophet. He is a prophet of some sort. He is the middleman from whoever's up there to whoever's on Earth. And on top of all that, he said he could make it rain, and not money, which he could do money too, we'll get into that, but literally make it rain. He could heal people, and he could use his future seeing powers to tell you you were going to die, but because of him, you would come back after death. So basically he was like, "Oh yeah, you guys are gonna die like on Tuesday at 3 o'clock by getting hit by a bus, but don't worry, 16 years after that, I'll bring you back. It's gonna be some crazy zombie apocalyptic shit. It's crazy. Don't worry, I'm a 1,000-year-old angel, okay? I can see the future." Alright. But he basically made death feel like a very normal thing, regularly telling his followers that the goal in life was to be on the other side, and the other side being the afterlife.
Lou talked about death frequently and how going to the other side was the ultimate goal.
And this commune was made up of a small group of people with very diverse backgrounds, all vulnerable in some way that Perez, or Lou Castro, would take care of.
He also made sure that all of the members of Angel's Landing had their needs needs met. Members of the Angels Landing cult had been living really well.
But there was always a price to pay for that stuff.
He would actually make sure that everyone on the compound's needs were met, and not just met because they would live very extravagantly. And this is like not like a lot of other cults. I mean, usually you find that the cult leader is the only one living extravagantly, but he made sure that everybody was kind of even keel, like everybody had stuff. But there's a reason for that, and it's really up. So the compound itself was located at North Oliver near the town of Ketchy, Kansas. What a fun name. And they would have 2 fairly large houses and a swimming pool. And all the members, like I said, had pretty expensive vehicles, and Perez himself reportedly drove a lot of Corvettes. Very discreet cult leader. And Perez would make use of his different personas of angels inhabiting his body to control his followers. Those angels being Daniel, Arthur, and Amber. And he would open life insurance policies for commune members and set up other commune members as the beneficiaries of those policies. You see where the money's coming from, you'll see it gets bad. Oh, I forgot I needed to tell you something. What was it? What was it? What was it? I can't remember what it was. What was it? Oh yeah! Thank you to Vessi for sponsoring this video. Vessi, a brand I have worked with since the very beginning, for 5 years now. I absolutely adore Vessi, the whole business and their product. For more than 5 years now, I have been wearing Vessi's pretty damn near every single day. Whether I'm playing with the dogs, walking the dogs, and I'm not talking about my feet, but I am, just going about my day, running errands, running around my office, or going out to dinner. No matter what the weather is or the task at hand, Vessi is there every step of the way. And there are so many reasons I love Vessis, but one of the main ones and one of the coolest ones is that they're 100% waterproof. And with my life, with having 5 dogs and a cat, I need shoes I can clean, and I need shoes I can trust. And if they get dirty, I can wash them with ease without getting my socks wet. And I love all my Vessis equally, but with the weekend sneakers specifically, I can do it all and look good while doing it. Vessis are lightweight, breathable, and made for non-stop days, which are most of my days. And like I said before, they're waterproof and super comfortable and really easy to get on, which I appreciate. It's like putting on a sock. And I travel a lot, so they're really compactable and easy to pack. So upgrade your everyday with waterproof comfort. So grab your pair now and go to vessi.com/callmechris and get 15% off your first pair at checkout. So again, click the link down in the description below or go to vessi.com/callmechris and get 15% off your new favorite pair of shoes, aka Vessis, today. Thank you again to Vessi for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. So we would basically direct how the policies were to be written. He had a very specific way of writing these policies, and then he would convince his followers that those who died would come back, as we know, zombie apocalypse shit, manipulating them to carry out his fraud, basically, because he's, you know, putting other people's names on the policies, like people that aren't related to these people, or himself, his name on these policies, just to be able to get the money after these people die. But Chris, how would he get the money? He'd have to wait for people to die. He'd have to wait, like, you know, 50, 60, 70 years. No, when money got tight in the commune, one of his followers would just mysteriously die. When the rent had to be paid, he would just off somebody, which is so insane. And then obviously when that person died, a very large life insurance check would benefit the commune, amounting to millions of dollars. So on top of his insurance death scheme, he was obviously exploiting these young girls as well. Like, he's just bad at every angle, just a scum of the earth at every angle. And he would tell the girls, in order to keep them quiet, by him doing what he was doing, it would fix them, because he is who he is. He's a 1,000-year-old angel. He has all these powers. So he said all this stuff to basically just keep them quiet. So in 2001, Mona Griffith, a member of the commune, would die in a plane crash in South Dakota with her boyfriend and 12-year-old daughter. This one wasn't actually procured by Perez. Obviously, he didn't make a plane crash. It was just a really up coincidence. So Perez, or Lou Castro, it was the one listed as a brother at the obituary and on the life insurance policy, which was $700,000. And he would get that $700,000 over her other child, who he had one child that died in the plane crash, but she had another child that didn't die in the plane crash. So he would just take all of that money and not give any to the kid. And then on June 2003, Patricia Hughes, a member of the commune as well, would die from what was believed to be an accidental drowning in the commune pool. So a funeral would take place in South Texas, and it's been reported that Perez told commune members that attended the funeral not to tell anyone in Texas that he was in Kansas, because he doesn't exist, remember? He's dead. On paper, anyway. And then in March 2006, Brian Hughes, Patricia's husband, and also a member of the commune, would die in South Dakota while working underneath a vehicle.
Brian was a diesel mechanic. I remember Lou telling Brian, you will someday get your chance to go to the other side. Brian was so safety conscious that day. Somehow that jack slipped.
Very suspicious. And then in 2008, Jennifer Hudson, not that Jennifer Hudson, different Jennifer Hudson, a real estate agent and a member of the commune, would die when her vehicle crossed into oncoming traffic and would hit a truck head on. Again, very suspicious. And Sarah McGarth, her daughter and also former member of the commune, would open up about her mom's death in 2008. And she would recount that her mom went to work that day and she tried calling her, but her mom never answered.
Lou comes downstairs and he says, Jennifer's been in an accident. He said, she's dead, isn't she?
But Perez wouldn't really give her a straight answer, and that made the daughter really, really mad.
He wouldn't answer me. And that really pissed me off. So I go running behind him and I said, what did you do to my mom?
I mean, the people in the commune, you know, they're not stupid. They know that, you know, these events that are happening might be caused by Perez because they're going to come back later. It doesn't matter if they die and we collect money because they're going to come back.
Tried to tase me or whatever the fuck
But this started to lose its
I gave away a whole bag.
So many people were dying. Because Trish and Brian had died. They were other people in the commune and they hadn't come back yet. So the daughter obviously believed that her mother wasn't going to come back, at least anytime soon either. So investigators would start to catch on to this scheme. A lot of life insurance policies were being paid out to like one specific person or these specific people in this commune, and people were dying left and right. And who was this guy? Who was Lou Castro? They didn't know. So Sedgwick County Sheriff's Detective Ron Goodwin, along with other investigators, compiled 500,000 pages worth of documentation of what Perez was up to, which spanned over 20 years and multiple states, as we know. And Goodwin devoted 9 years to figure out who Perez was and where the hell he got all his money, because Perez was living like a king. And he had no job. He had no job this entire time, but he's driving around a bunch of Corvettes. He has houses. He has a pool. He has all of these things, so it just didn't add up. So he became suspicious of Perez, at this point still known as Lou Castro, in April 2003 when he noticed Perez's group had multiple $40,000 to $50,000 vehicles. Very suspicious. And their compound had the 2 houses and a very nice swimming pool as well. So all of this unexplained wealth was starting to look pretty nefarious. A lot of nefarious activities looked like they were happening. So Goodwin was on the case. So if you remember, June 2003, a member of the group, Patricia Hughes, would die in the commune swimming pool accidentally. For those of you listening, I'm making very obvious, you know, quotes, winking. Accidentally. And this was one of the cases that drew the attention of Goodwin to look further and discover that Castro may not be who he says he is. And Castro had no apparent records and was not easily identifiable, and had basically no identifiable past either, because the guy didn't exist. So he would do a little song and dance and claim that he came from oil wealth and he was an inventor, or that he was a cattle seller, just spewing bullshit to investigators, and none of which could be verified, so it didn't hold up very long. But all of the members in the commune were identifiable through databases, but Lou Castro was not, so that was looking suspicious even more. But Goodwin did find that Castro had a South Dakota ID card, and this would lead to the discovery of Mona Griffith's death in 2001, on top of her boyfriends, and her daughters, where Castro was listed as the brother of Griffiths. So he was just raking in the dough after all three of these people died. So in 2004, Goodwin would enlist the help of FBI agent John Sullivan to help identify Castro. And they had worked together before on other drug cases, and Sullivan was unable to find a photo or description matching Lou Castro. So not even the FBI could find out who this guy was. And Goodwin would do everything he could to get fingerprints. He would follow Castro around and gather trash from the compound. He even got permission from a manager to collect glasses and silverware. This is some like movie shit. But no fingerprint to identify Castro was ever found. So the case would slowly become cold. So Goodwin would drive to Angel's Landing over the next couple years every once in a while, because he would just wake up every night just wondering who the hell Castro really was and what the hell was he up to. And in 2006, Goodwin would learn about another death. And this one was Brian Hughes, Patricia Hughes' husband, who was crushed under that car in South Dakota. And he heard about it due to a custody case involving the Hughes daughter, and at this point there were 5 deaths from 3 fatal accidents in just 5 years, all associated with the same commune. So in late 2006 and early 2007, Goodwin requested for the U.S. Attorney's Office to open a case to review the commune's finances. Now we're getting somewhere. And around the same time, Goodwin was assigned to a task force to go after the Crips, a street gang located in Wichita. Crips. Wichita. Those are 2 fun words to say. And it's here that he began working with Clint Snyder. Cool ass name. And would tell him all about Castro. And Snyder became very interested, but they were too busy with the Crips at this point. And then in 2008, as we know, Jennifer Hudson, no, not that one, would die in an apparent traffic accident, bringing the total commune deaths to 6. And in response, strategies to trick Castro to giving prints were thrown around. Goodwin went with another detective to Angel's Landing under the guise of looking into the area for home break-ins. So they gave Castro glossy images of suspects, quote-unquote suspects, asking if he knew any of them. And Castro would only touch the images with the palms of his hands. Bastard. And would move them on a table using his fingernails. The guy, he was a shifty fuck. And Castro would give his name but claimed that he didn't have an ID around, so he couldn't give one to them. And he also provided a false social security number on top of that. So in late 2009, the Crips case cools off a bit now. And Goodwin and Snyder are assigned to the U.S. Attorney's Office with the focus on the financial investigation. And Goodwin would receive a call from Sullivan, the FBI agent from before, asking if there was a fax machine nearby, because he wanted to send over an email from the boyfriend of a young woman who had been part of the commune, and he was very suspicious of Castro. And at this point, Castro had moved to Columbia, Tennessee in early 2010. So after the FBI received this email, the agents started to watch Castro's house. And he was currently living with 5 people at that point. And Castro, at this point, had also changed his name again to Joe Venegas upon moving to Tennessee. And he would be caught on camera showing his new ID to open a bank account. And that is when he would be charged with aggravated identity theft and fraudulent use of a social security number. We got him. Whoop, whoop, we got him. And on April 21st, 2010, Goodwin, Snyder, and Sullivan would go to Tennessee with a search warrant of Castro's home. So he was arrested and got fingerprinted, finally, but no match would be found in the federal database. And other investigators were interviewing witnesses through all of this time, but the members of the community weren't really giving up much info. They were all pretty loyal to Castro at this point. So Goodwin and Snyder just talked to basically anyone who would talk to them about this commune and everything that was going on. And they would interview about 85 people. And Castro, during this whole thing, would just stay completely silent, giving them the complete silent treatment. But he would plead guilty to one of the 2 charges brought against him in the federal case. And he would just go to federal prison as John Doe, because they still didn't know who this guy was. So during his sentence, Goodwin and Snyder worked to build the best case they had against him. And they discovered from Patricia Hughes' mother in Beeville, Texas, that Patricia had dated a man named Daniel Perez. Ding, 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 ding. But had since heard that he was dead. So they followed that thread to find an old booking mug and fingerprints that matched Castro's. And boom, they found him. So they picked up copies of the police reports on Perez from Beeville, including that dismissed case from 1996 to 1997 mentioned in the beginning with the girls who were 11 and 14. And the case, as we know, was dismissed because Perez was presumed dead. And as Perez was away in prison, his commune began to open up more and more. They began to be sick and tired of Perez's bullshit. And one young woman would recount an incident in which Perez made her break a computer hard drive with a hammer and toss it into the lagoon in Angel's Landing.
Bro,
and the hard drive
Greg
would actually be recovered after Cedric County firefighters drained the entire body of water to find it. And eventually, one of his followers became the Big Break. She revealed that Perez was described as someone capable of seeing the future and needed a young girl to live. And she would describe all of his crimes that he did throughout all of the years. And she would also reveal that Perez had forced her to give a false story about Patricia Hughes when authorities arrived. Patricia Hughes being the one that accidentally drowned in the commune pool. And this girl was supposed to say that Hughes slipped and fell and drowned in the pool. But what she actually experienced was screams and splashes, leading to Perez seemingly out of breath and completely wet. He had drowned her. And with the testimony, they finally had enough for a murder case. Thank God. And in January 2012, Cedric County prosecutors filed murder and dozens of other charges against Perez while he was still in prison. And on February 2015, Daniel Perez was convicted of 28 charges by the jury. 1 count of first-degree murder, 8 counts of rape, 7 counts of aggravated criminal sodomy, 3 counts of aggravated assault, 1 count of exploitation of a child, 8 counts making false information, and he received 2 life sentences plus 406 months on lesser charges with no possibility for parole for at least 80 years. So the guy's gonna die in a rotting jail hole. Thank the Lord. But my Lord, like this guy, I mean, just, again, I don't know how many times I say it, just scum of the earth. Like, I am so glad he got caught and these officers were just on him for as long as they were. And I hope all of the victims involved are living much better lives. But just incredibly sad. Incredibly sad. But that brings us to our next cult, which is Love Has Won. So born on November 30th, 1975 in McPherson, Kansas, Amy Carlson was unfortunately born. Subject of HBO miniseries Love Has Won, The Cult of Mother God, Carlson's early life appeared pretty conventional. She was raised in a middle-class family, excelled in school for the most part, and even participated in the school choir. But her parents would divorce during her childhood, and this would lead her and her sister Tara to split their time between their mother's home in Kansas and their father's home in Oklahoma City. Then following allegations of by their stepmother, the sisters moved in permanently with their mother and stepfather. And the family would later relocate to Dallas, Texas, when Carlson continued her education. And in the mid-2000s, Carlson became deeply involved in New Age philosophies and would frequently post on a forum called lightworkers.org. And I went on that site, it's gone now. So I guess we'll never know. But there she connected with a user named Amarith White Eagle, the original Father God, who convinced her of her own divinity.
Do you need drugs?
Oh,
Are you geeking
no.
that hard?
Or should I say, oh, God. And as an adult, she would work as a manager at McDonald's, you know,
yeah, it did?
as
Okay,
the divine mother of God does. And she would go on to have 3 children, each with different fathers. And in late 2007, Carlson left her 3rd husband, children, and job, severing ties with most of her family completely. Mother of the Year. And she would join White Eagle in Colorado. And together they founded a group initially known as Galactic Federation of Light. The Galactic Federation of Light. I mean, that's a pretty cool name. It's a pretty cool name. I'll give them that. Some sort of Star Wars shit. But this later would evolve into Love Has Won. And Carlson would profess to be a 19-billion-year-old deity, having lived 534 previous lives. She's got a couple up on Perez at this point, the 1,000-year-old angel. She's like, I'll take your 1,000-year angel and raise you a 19-billion-year-old deity who's lived 534 lives, different lives. What the f? And these lives, if you were wondering, included the life of Jesus Christ, Joan of Arc, and Marilyn Monroe. Just like
finally,
all the coolest people ever, basically. I wish she did like Elvis Presley too, but that would mess up her timelines. That wouldn't be legit, you know. And she asserted that she could heal ailments such as cancer with the powers of love. The powers of love. So similar to Perez saying he can heal all this shit. It's just the same with all of them. At least be original. Like Jim Jones did the same shit. He said he could see into the future. He could cure cancer. Yada yada yada. I would like them to be original at some point. I'm just kidding. I don't want to see any more cult leaders. I'll tell you what. And under Carlson's leadership, Love Has Won combined elements of New Age spirituality, conspiracy theories, and mainstream religions. The group conducted daily live streams to recruit members, solicit donations, and promote spiritual healing services. I love spiritual live streams where you can donate bits to cult leaders. They're my favorite. But Love Has Won operated under a unique spiritual framework that combined various religions and mystical elements.
Like the hot
Amy
spot.
Carlson
Like
being
like, hey, yo,
the mother of God. She was basically seen as the only conduit for spiritual enlightenment and ascension. And the father of God was basically just a Rolodex of male figures in her life. Throughout her leadership, Carlson took on multiple fathers of gods. Male consorts who she claimed were incarnations of divine masculinity, and these individuals often became key enforcers of her control over her followers. So then there was the Galactic Federation and Ascension beliefs, which was that the cult believed that the world was in the process of a great transformation, and Carlson was the only entity capable of leading humanity into the fifth dimension. Fifth dimension, okay. Alright, not quite as, you know, there was space with Applewhite or whatever the hell his name was. And Scientology's got his own thing, but Fifth Dimension, I gotta say, it is original. It's more original. But the followers were required to relinquish their ego and fully submit to Carlson's teachings. And any deviation from her doctrine was seen as a resistance to spiritual growth. And the Love Has Won integrated elements of various conspiracy theories, as I was saying, including ideas of extraterrestrials, 5D consciousness, and global government corruption, which, like, she's got some points. She's got some points there, but most of it's ridiculous. And the cult used several methods to attract and retain members, because you're like, how does a woman just walk up to you on the street and say, I'm a 19 billion-year-old deity that's lived 534 other lives, including of which is Jesus Christ, Joan of Arc, and Marilyn Monroe. Would you like to join my little cult? People are just like, alright. Like, I just don't see that happening. So how did they do it?
Okay,
They did it with social media and daily live streams. This is not looking good for social media right now. Love Has Won gained traction through frequent online broadcasts. And Carlson and her followers discussed their beliefs, solicited donations, and recruited new members that way. And recruits were often those experiencing hardships, which we find with pretty much every cult I've ever covered, and just every cult in history. Just vulnerable people, including those that have financial instability or health crises as well. And the cult just offered them a sense of community and purpose and healing. And many members were drawn to Carlson's promises of spiritual enlightenment and physical healing from diseases such as cancer through etheric surgeries. What? These are also sometimes called psychic surgeries. In other words, surgery that uses psychic or spiritual means to avoid physical contact. So there's like those people that like move their hands over people's bodies, and then the people under it are like moving and shit, and it's just all like a placebo kind of effect. That's kind of what they're talking about.
I grew up watching thousands of people at revival conferences claim to be healed of everything from arthritis to cancer.
But again, living in this cult required complete devotion to the Mother of God and a very strict adherence to her rules. And living in this cult was not that glamorous. Members would live in very cramped quarters, and they often did not have adequate food or heating. And they shared a communal space in Colorado where they expected to serve Carlson without any question. So in their daily life, the followers would participate in online broadcasts to spread the group's message and solicit donations, and this would be their main source of income. And the members would have to refer to Carlson as Mom and constantly praise her. Bitch had a praise gank. Let's just be real. Believing that she was working to save humanity. And those who deviated and displayed ego or disobeyed orders were humiliated on live streams or subjected to verbal and physical abuse.
My vision was chicken parmesan. So the fucking Adams turn around on me and get me meatballs. I didn't say meatballs.
And to maintain power over her followers, Carlson implemented a series of manipulative and extreme control tactics. She would force fasting, having members often deprived of any food as a means of spiritual cleansing and control, basically. And Carlson herself reportedly went without eating for extended periods of time, encouraging others to do the same, which, like, I don't believe her. She's sneaking Pop-Tarts, like, late at night, I know it. And she would also sleep deprive them, similar to Jim Jones. Be original, Carlson. But the followers were kept in a state of exhaustion, limiting their ability to think critically or question the group's practices, because sleep deprivation, I mean, it's real. It's a torture tactic. Like, if you're sleep deprived, you're a zombie at that point. You are a brainwashed zombie, or have the potential to be. And then just full-on isolation from the outside world. Again, just be original. Just same shit. Any communication with outsiders was completely discouraged, reinforcing dependency on the cult. Everything's about separating and then brainwashing and just having full control. And then, of course, we had threats of punishment. One man was reportedly found after group members discussed how his energy wasn't right during a live stream and that he was on the wrong side of the mountain. So they would basically stick him out in the wilderness alone, naked and dehydrated, with cactus needles in his feet, and be forced to look up into the sun until his eyes were burned. Oh my god. What? And naturally, as many cults do, members were required to surrender their financial assets to the group, because it's communal. Everybody is equal here. Everybody can put their money in and just never see it again. And don't worry, I'm not buying Pop-Tarts with them, I swear. So there was the financial manipulation, the isolation from families, practices, claims of divine healing, miraculous transformations, literal torture tactics. It is just hell on earth for these people, but they felt like this is where they needed to be.
I love meatballs, but I didn't fucking say that. I get fucked up every moment by you fucking mother and shove it up your fucking ass. I'm gonna take another tequila shot. Do that shit.
And on top of all this, Carlson would claim that this wasn't a cult. This isn't a cult. This is just fun. We're just having a good time. I was Jesus Christ in a past life. Don't question me. It would even be featured on Dr. Phil.
They're very peaceful here at the moment.
Things are often not peaceful around you, because I've seen some of your streams. I've seen some of the videos where you seem to be upset a lot, yelling and screaming and calling names and all. What is it that upsets you the most?
Well, a lot of those are taken out of context.
But time would go on and Carlson's health would decline. Womp womp. And her belief system impacted her physical condition. She obviously adhered to very unconventional health practices, including the ingestion of colloidal silver, which the group promoted as a cure-all remedy. It was even purchasable on their website, which is obviously no longer available. And in the months leading up to her death, Carlson appeared very weak, with thinning hair and discolored skin, indicative of severe health decline. And prolonged consumption of colloidal silver can lead to Argyria, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. A condition causing blue-gray discoloration of skin and may result in seizures and organ failure. Maybe don't eat silver. Just a thought. I actually don't care. You're kind of a piece of shit. But the combination of heavy booze, lack of eating, intense fasting, and the colloidal silver wreaking havoc on her body, it was just a recipe for death. And that is what would happen. She would die. And in April of 2021, Carlson's mummified body was discovered in the group's Colorado headquarters. And just a little trigger warning, this is very strange. Her body was found in a sleeping bag wrapped in Christmas lights, with her face covered in glitter and her eyes missing, suggesting a makeshift shrine. I have no words. I have no words for that. And the 7 members of the Love Has Won were obviously arrested and charged with of a corpse and also child because 2 children were present in the home where Carlson's body was found, which is horrifying to think about. And there were initial plans to upgrade the charges to tampering with the deceased human body, but all the charges would later be dropped. So what remains of Love Has Won? Well, following her death, the group faced increased scrutiny, obviously, leading to its eventual soft ending, though splinter groups remain. And co-leader Jason Castillo, which was, one of the fathers of God, formed a new group called Joy Reigns. And other former members would rebrand their online presence to FD Full Disclosure, launching a new website to continue spreading their beliefs. And this website is crazy. I kind of want to sign up. Should that be a video? Should I sign up, tell you guys what happens? I'm just kidding, I'm not going to do that. That's crazy. The brainwashing that happened in this and the aftermath, just brutal. But that brings us to our final cult, which is Rajneesh Puram. So Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh was born on December 11th, 1931 as Chandra Mohan Jan in Kushwaha. Sorry if I'm saying it's wrong, I'm trying my best. It was a small village in central India's Madhya Pradesh state and was the full-on subject of a Netflix documentary, which I'm sure you've seen if you like watching me, which was Wild Wild Country. He was the eldest of 11 children in the Jaina family, and a Jaina family is one that practices the teachings of Jainism, which was an ancient Indian religion focused on non-violence and separation from attachment to worldly possessions. And he would spend most of his childhood with his maternal grandparents, and they allowed him considerable freedom, fostering his independent and inquisitive nature. And his father, Babulal Jain, was a cloth merchant, and he demonstrated a highly developed intellect and a rebellious spirit from a very young age. This is Bhagwan I'm talking about, the cult leader, the kid that's growing up. Sorry, it's not the father I'm talking about, it's the kid. And he would regularly question established norms and beliefs. And in 1951, he began his studies in Hitkarini College in Jabalpur. But he would be later asked to leave due with conflicts with his instructor. And he then transferred to D.N. Jain College, where he would complete his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy in 1955. And at the ripe old age of 21, he would experience what he called a spiritual awakening. And this had major impact on his later teachings. And in 1957, he would earn his Master of Arts in Philosophy from the University of Sagar, graduating with distinction. And after completing his postgraduate studies, he secured a teaching position at Rapier Sanskrit College. However, his unconventional ideas led his vice chancellor to request his transfer, deeming him a threat to the students morally and religiously. And he would later become a lecturer in philosophy at Jabalpur University in 1958 and was promoted to professor in 1960. So I guess they were chill with whatever the hell he was trying to do. And during his academic tenure, he traveled extensively across India, engaging in public speaking opportunities. And he was a very outspoken critic of socialism, Mahatma Gandhi's philosophies, and institutionalized religions, advocating for a more individual approach to spirituality. And in 1970, he introduced the practice of dynamic meditation and initiated his first group of disciples known as Neo-Sannyasins. Okay? And dynamic meditation was characterized by fast breathing and celebration with music and dance. So just me having a panic attack, basically, with like tunes bumping, just... And this movement encouraged followers to embrace a celebratory lifestyle, pursuing physical pleasures. Oh no. And in 1974, he established an ashram in Pune, India, which became a hub for spiritual seekers from around the world. And an ashram is a place dedicated to spiritual practices, often found in very remote areas. And the ashram offered various therapies and workshops, blending Eastern spirituality with Western psychotherapy techniques. And he was known in the West as the sex guru. Alright, and he would attract many Westerners through promises of enlightenment, freedom, and belonging. Again, be original. So he would denounce traditional religion and promote self-actualization by means of meditation, free love, and communal living. Because if everyone's on the same grade, much easier to control. But by the late 1970s, Rajneesh's teachings and rapid following attracted significant attention. This guy's got a lot of names. I'm just going to call him Rajneesh from here on out. And this created tension with Indian authorities and traditional religious groups. His progressive views on sexuality and criticism of established religions made him a very controversial figure. So seeking a location to expand his commune with no interference, Rajneesh and his secretary, Manan Sheela, identified the United States of America as a suitable destination. Land of the free. A little too free in this scenario. And the vast lands and promise of religious freedom presented an opportunity to establish a new community aligned with their vision. And facing increasing pressure from Indian authorities due to the controversial teachings, he relocated to the United States in 1981. And the Rajneesh Foundation International purchased 64,229 acres in Big Muddy Ranch near Antelope, Oregon, with the intent to build a large, self-sustaining commune. And the commune would become known as Rajneeshpuram and was the center of various legal and social controversies. But more on that later. The commune transformed the ranch into a thriving city, basically. Constructed of essential infrastructure, including residential buildings, a public transport system, a sewage treatment plant, a reservoir, and even an airstrip. I mean, in the cult communes, this one's up there. I mean, by nice, I mean terrible, but I mean, you know what I mean. But the goal was to create a self-sufficient community capable of supporting thousands of residents. And they would be incorporated as a city in May of 1982, home solely to followers of Rajneesh. Now, Sheela served as Rajneesh's personal secretary from 1981 to 1985. And she managed commune operations and acted as the primary spokesperson of the movement. Her very assertive and often confrontational demeanor made her a prominent and polarizing figure in the community. Sheela was basically an instrument in the commune's development. She oversaw all the land acquisition, infrastructure projects, and legal strategies. And her leadership style was marked by decisiveness, as she maintained strict control over the commune's affairs. And the small town of Antelope, with a population fewer than 60 residents, became a focal point of conflict. The rapid influx of Rajneesh's followers led to cultural clashes and fears among locals about the commune's intentions. And an activist group known as the Thousand Friends in Oregon actively worked to prevent the growth and legitimacy of the commune. And the establishment of Rajneeshpuram led to numerous legal battles over land use. We got a Yellowstone situation happening here. And incorporation legitimacy and alleged violations of state and federal laws. And these disputes would attract national attention. And residents of Rajneeshpuram viewed the surrounding Oregon communities as bigots. So in 1984, members of the commune, under the direction of Sheela, cultivated salmonella bacteria in their medical laboratory. And they then contaminated salad bars at 10 local restaurants in the Dallas by spreading bacteria over food items, which is so wrong and disgusting. And the deliberate contamination led to 751 reported cases of salmonellosis, marking the largest bioterrorist attack on U.S. soil, which is crazy. And they aimed to influence local elections in favor of Rajneesh's by suppressing voter turnout in Wasco County through incapacitation by food poisoning, which is so fucked up. But it ultimately had the opposite effect, as local residents were enraged by the suspected Rajneeshi involvement. They showed up in even greater numbers, as they should. And to gain political control over Wasco County, Rajneeshpuram leaders initiated the Share a Home program. They would bring in thousands of homeless individuals from across the United States. And the intention was to register these individuals as voters in the county, thereby swaying election results in favor of Rajneeshi-backed candidates, which is like, the amount of planning is wild. wild country. I get it now. But local officials would recognize these tactics as an attempt of voter manipulation. And the Wasco County clerk enforced regulations requiring new voters to provide proof of residency and qualifications. So this effectively prevented the newly arrived homeless individuals from participating in the elections. And a federal judge upheld the measures, which ruined the Rajneeshis' plan to influence local governance through fraudulent means. So the Rajneeshpuram community engaged in widespread immigration fraud to facilitate the illegal entry and residency of foreign disciples. And this included setting up sham marriages between U.S. citizens and foreign nationals to circumvent immigration laws. And in 1985, federal authorities indicted several commune members for their involvement in the fraudulent activities, marking one of the largest recorded marriage fraud schemes in the United States. So not only were they one of the largest bioterrorist attack groups, they were also the largest marriage fraud scheme in the United States. They're just hitting all the world records, or United States records at least, you know. Gotta commend them on that. I'm just kidding, don't do that. But in September 1985, Sheila abruptly left the commune with several close associates, and the sudden departure was unexpected and raised suspicions among the remaining members. And following her exit, Rajneesh publicly accused her and her team of numerous criminal activities, including the attempted murder of his personal physician, the poisonings of public officials in Oregon, wiretapping and bugging within the commune in Rajneesh's own residence and of officials outside the commune, and the bioterror attack in the Dales, she's just putting it all. He's like, she's gone? She's gone? Okay, she did it all. It was her idea. She's not here to answer for it, so it's her idea. Crazy bitch. So the FBI and the other federal agencies then launched extensive investigations into the activities of Rajneeshpuram, and they would confirm the criminal acts previously alleged by Rajneesh, including the bioterror attack, assassination plots, embezzlement, and illegal surveillance operations. And these actions were just part of a broader strategy to maintain control over the commune and suppress dissent. And key figures in the commune, including Sheila, were convicted on charges of immigration fraud, wiretapping, and conspiracy to tamper with consumer products. And Sheila's conviction for her role in the Salmonella bioterror attack led to her imprisonment and eventual collapse of Rajneeshpuram. Though Rajneesh was very quick to point the finger, it would not prevent him from his own arrest. On October 28, 1985, Rajneesh was arrested aboard a rented jet in North Carolina. Supposedly, he and his group were headed to Bermuda to avoid prosecution, and he would face a 34-count indictment, primarily focusing on immigration violations, including the arrangement of the sham marriages mentioned earlier. And to avoid extended legal battles, Rajneesh entered a Alford plea, acknowledging that sufficient evidence existed for a conviction without admitting guilt. So the plea deal resulted in a 10-year suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, a $400,000 fine covering penalties and prosecution costs, and an agreement to leave the United States of America and not return for at least 5 years without explicit permission from the U.S. Attorney General. So following the plea agreement, Rajneesh would leave the United States, and he then faced entry refusal from 21 countries before eventually returning to India, where he resumed his spiritual teachings at the Poon Ashram. And after the collapse of Rajneeshpuram, many followers just dispersed globally. Some distanced themselves from the movement, while others continued to practice and promote Rajneesh's teachings independently. And Rajneesh rebranded himself to Osho upon his return to India. He's pulling a Daniel Perez. And he would continue to attract followers until his death in January 19th of 1990. And the movement adapted accordingly, with the main ashram in Poon transforming into the Osho International Meditation Resort, attracting visitors worldwide. And Osho's teachings have influenced various New Age practices and continue to attract a global audience. And the movement emphasizes specifically meditation, mindfulness, and personal transformation. However, despite its ongoing appeal, the movement has faced allegations of former members have come forward with accounts of misconduct within the communes during the 1970s and the 1980s, leading to renewed scrutiny and discussions about the movement's legacy altogether. And this was all including the account of from a woman whose mother brought her into Rajneesh's community at the age of 9. And she describes life as a very young girl navigating a free love community and dealing with the advances of much older men. She would quote to say, "At the time I suffered silently as he repeatedly drew me in with affection and took me to bed only to ignore me for days as I watched him pursue adult women, and in time, my peers. At the same time, other men circled, and eventually I gave in, as sleeping around and being liberated was the norm that was modeled to me. As time passed, I felt increasingly worthless and angst-ridden, and took my bad feelings to mean I was flawed. We were to be positive, not negative, so I didn't speak of my pain and confusion. When the commune collapsed in 1985, we were all flung back into the world unprepared. I was 16, disoriented, broke, and unsure of who I was. The trauma of my upbringing haunted me, but I couldn't yet name it. As the years passed, I came to see it for what it was, and came to see how Osho's teachings tilled the soil for beauty, under the guise of spiritual freedom to boot. It sickened me. I distanced myself from the movement, from the teachings, and forgot a life of my own. So, like, everything that we talked about was just riddled with this. All the fraud and bioterrorism, it was all, you know, a means to have this group of people that Rajneesh could just control and do whatever he wanted with, which we see with all of these cult leaders that we're talking about, and a lot of other ones that I've talked about. And it's just, it's horrible and so heartbreaking, especially with kids. I mean, they don't know better. They don't know how to protect themselves, how to go about life. If an adult is telling them to do something, you're going to do it. So it's just horrible, horrible, and I'm glad he's dead. But that is it for the 3 cults that we discussed today. I know it was a lot, but a lot of you guys asked for a cult video, so I gave it to you. But if you have any other video ideas, let me know down in the comments below. And I hope you stay very, very safe, and I will see you in this.
Tragically, airplane accidents have been reported far too frequently as of late. And with reported crashes on the rise, you've probably heard the resurfacing of an old internet urban legend. The urban legend that airplane crash positions are designed to kill you. Crash positions, or brace positions, are made to ensure the least amount of injury possible when someone is involved in a plane. However, with stories of lawsuits where people are injured or killed in the event of a plane crash, the urban legend states that brace positions are actually designed in order to ensure a quick death, all in an effort for airlines and plane manufacturers to pay out as little money as possible in injury claims after a crash. Is there any truth to this, and what is the story of airline brace positions anyway? That's what I want to talk about today. We're going to talk about brace positions and the accidents that inspired them, as well as the theory that they're just a hidden form of euthanasia to see if it has any legs. Or wings, I guess. Before we begin, I want to say thank you so much to everyone who showed support for the videos being uploaded over on Spotify. It means a lot, and the link will be there in the description if you would rather watch these videos. Also, I just posted a video over on the second channel, and again, thank you all so much for the love and support you've already shown on there. New content coming over there weekly. Link will be in the description if you want to check it out. So if you're ready to talk about airplane tragedy and conspiracy, then stick around after the ad as we discuss if brace positions are meant to kill you. Also, the sponsor for this video once again knew exactly what I would be doing, and they were cool with it. So one day, I will find something they will not touch. I assure you. But before we get started, I want to thank today's sponsor and friend of the channel, AG1. If you've been on the channel for any amount of time, then you know about AG1. And that's because AG1 is your one-stop shop for all your pre- and probiotics, multivitamins, and multiminerals, and much more in one easy way. It's hard to be healthy, so the easier, the better. And it's hard to get easier than AG1, because with just 8 to 12 ounces of water and a spoonful of AG1, you're ready to go. So instead of a bunch of different doses every day, you can just keep up with one easy drink. Since taking AG1, my general mood's improved, my energy throughout the day's improved, and a bunch of factors that go into that, like exercise and eating right. But when you start putting the things in your body that your body's been craving, you'll be amazed by how much more you can get done. And AG1's not a chore either. Not only is it easy to make, but it's just a delightfully sweet taste that I enjoy along with my morning coffee. Also, AG1's got something new to share today. That's because AG1 now also offers omega-3 supplements. It's funny, I had just started buying milk at the store that had omega-3 infused into it because I was like, I should probably get some of that because, you know, you hear cool stuff about it. And then immediately AG1's like, hey, we just started doing omega-3. So would you look at that? And AG1's omega-3 is sourced from wild-caught small fish and is flavored with natural lemon. So it's hard to incorporate an easier, healthier step into your morning routine than with this. And if you haven't tried AG1 yet, then now is the perfect time to get in on the offer. That's because for a limited time, if you go to drinkag1.com and use the discount code Wendigoon, or head to the link in the description, or scan my QR code, not only will you get $76 worth of free extras like 5 free travel packs of AG1, a shaker bottle, a bottle of vitamin D3 and K2, and a metal canister, right now you'll also get AG's omega-3s thrown in for good measure. That is right. What's not to love about this? So to get started with AG1 for less than $3 a day, again, head to the link in the description at drinkag1.com/Wendigoon or scan the QR code to get in on this incredible offer today. Thank you to AG1 as always for sponsoring the channel. It means the most. Check them out at the link in the description, and we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. The idea of bracing for impact is a natural human reaction. If you're about to fall or about to be hit, people will naturally tense up in order to avoid the brunt of the damage. So while part of it may come natural, there wasn't a movement to standardize brace positions in commercial aviation until the 1950s. It wasn't until the 1950s when organizations like the FAA began to analyze crash reports and injuries to see the difference between what works and what doesn't. Since airplanes have a limited amount of space and weight, most of the implementations to keep people safe fall back on the passenger. So in the early 1960s, practices began to be implemented to keep people as safe as possible in the event of a plane crash. Early tests showed that in survivable accidents, the majority of injuries come from people either being thrown into the wall or the seat back in front of them. So in the early 1960s, airplane brace positions began to be implemented in order to prevent this. However, they were far different than what they are today. Now that I'm over here in my little demonstration corner, when airlines first began regulating brace positions, the idea was to reinforce what the seatbelt was already doing. So initial brace positions told passengers to set against the back of their chair like this, and then use their arms to cross over their chest and try to grab on to the seat back behind them. At the same time, your feet are to be kept firmly on the ground in order to move as little as possible. And in a perfect world, this strategy makes sense. Theoretically, if someone could keep themselves from moving in the event of a crash, well, that would be the least likely way to get injured. However, that is easier said than done in a 200-mile-per-hour plane crash. This seemed fine until more information regarding airplane crashes began to be made known. For one, while yes, hypothetically, if you could hold the weight of your body against the seat and not move at all, that would be really cool, but as mentioned, no matter how hard you hold on, you're going to get thrown forward regardless. This just adds an extra step to where your shoulder gets ripped out of socket before you are. Airplane seats are designed in order to mitigate as much of the force of an impact as possible, and they do a pretty good job at it. But regardless, some force will still be transmitted to the passenger. So people began to change their thought process to see how can we keep that force being transferred to the passenger as minimal as possible. It should also be mentioned that everything I'm saying applies to, once again, survivable plane crashes. Airplane crashes in themselves are exceedingly rare. It is by far the safest mode of transportation, except for maybe like a subway, but those tend to be more selective. And out of those rare crashes, the vast majority of crashes are on takeoff or landing. So the plane is moving relatively slow and near the ground. This normally results in the plane skidding across the ground or turning over. Again, a relatively survivable instance. If you're in a scenario, which is super rare out of the already super rare plane crashes, but if you're in a scenario where the plane's at like cruising altitude and just drops straight to the ground, or the plane is flying full speed into something, then, you know, just get in whatever position you feel comfortable with. Tragically, over the following decades, the instances that would provide the best data as what works and what doesn't in a plane crash was plane crashes. Likely the most influential plane crash that has ever happened when it comes to determining passenger safety was the Kegworth air disaster. On January the 8th, 1989, the British Midland Airways Flight 92 was making a flight from the London Heathrow Airport to the Belfast International Airport. The plane itself was new for the time, a Boeing 737-400. Shortly after takeoff, a fan blade broke in the left engine of the aircraft. Initially, the damage wasn't that severe, but it did cause smoke to begin to fill the cabin of the aircraft. Now, modern airplanes are made to run just fine on one engine if the need requires. So all the pilots had to do was shut down the left engine and use the right one until they land. However,
On older models of 737s, which the pilots were familiar with, air would be drawn from the right side of the aircraft into the main cabin. So typically, if the cabin was filling up with smoke, that meant something was going wrong on the right side of the plane. Not knowing that on the new 737-400, it drawed air from both sides of the plane. So the pilot shut down the right engine, and coincidentally, at the same time, smoke began to dissipate. So they thought they had solved the problem, when in reality they had turned off the only still fully operational engine. Because of the issue, the plane was diverted to the East Midlands Airport. But as they got low and tried to increase thrust on the defunct engine they thought was the only working one, it caused the broken fan blade to be pulled further into the engine and completely disable it. At this point, they were moving too slow and were too close to the ground to start up the right engine, and the plane crashed. It hit the ground and skipped over a road, stopping just short of the runway. In this tragic accident, 47 people died and 74 were seriously injured. In the wake of this tragedy, the UK Civil Aviation Authority began to analyze the results, based on an investigation of the crash as well as survivors' accounts. 10 seconds before they made impact, the pilot realized they were going to crash and announced throughout the cabin to brace for impact. Because of this, authorities were able to put together an analysis of what worked and what didn't. The data from this crash was actually so influential that in November of 2016, the International Board for Research into Aircraft Crash Events, or IBRACE, was formed in the wake of the investigation, which is a board made up of doctors and aviation authorities across the world in order to best prepare passengers for plane accidents. In the course of the Keckworth investigation, several other airline accidents were also brought in for analysis. Across all these incidents, there were some common through lines. A lot of the severe injuries and even deaths occurred because people were being thrown forward, which caused injury to either their neck or head. On top of that, non-life-threatening injuries like broken arms or legs came from them flailing about and hitting something inside of the cabin. There also proved to be issues with just keeping your head upright in the first place. Not only does that increase your risk of being hit by something like falling baggage from overhead compartments, but it led to some more terrifying injuries as well. In 1983, a fire began around the lavatory area of Air Canada Flight 797. This was while the plane was in midair and the plane had to make an emergency landing. However, because there was a fire inside of the pressurized cabin, when the plane landed and the doors of the fuselage were thrown open, it caused a wave of oxygen to flush into the plane itself and cause something known as a flashover. Essentially, when this new fuel source flooded into the plane, everything above the seats caught fire. This led to a lot of people being horrifically burned on their face, and the following smoke led to panic, and several people were unable to exit the aircraft. And tragically, in this event where the plane had to have an emergency landing and landed without impact, regardless, 23 people died. Instances like this and other airplane accidents led to aviation authorities making new rulings regarding the brace position. And this has led to the brace position as we know it today. Later, standardized brace positions would make the following adjustments. The primary one being, since it is near impossible to hold yourself against the back of the chair, instead anticipate the fact that you'll be thrown forward and start at the seat back in front of you. For most United States airlines, the standard practice is to place one hand on the seat back and the other hand overlapped with it, with your forehead cradled between your arms. In this sense, your arms effectively work as an airbag, making sure that any of the energy that's transferred in the crash goes to your forearms rather than your head. And while you might have a bad time if you break your arms in a plane crash, that is better than shattering your skull. Among various UK airlines, rather than placing your hands in front of you, instead you place your forehead flat on the seat back and overlock your hands along the back of your neck. This is done for one, to protect your brainstem, but also to protect yourself from any debris that could be flying around. Think about it, if any baggages come down from the overhead compartments, if a plane goes from 200 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour, those bags become missiles. Not to mention things like shattered glass that could be flying through the cabin if the fuselage is damaged. Now, some have argued that putting your head directly against the seat in front of you with no cushion from your arms can increase the possibility of a head injury, which is why in the US it's still the overlap, and in UK and other regions it's along the back of your head. Also, it is important in either position to overlap your hands instead of interlocking them, because if you interlock them in the event of a crash, you're probably going to break your fingers. One of the main injuries that is seen in a plane crash is injuries to the limbs, because people's arms and legs tend to fly out at the moment of impact. So while these two maneuvers take care of your hands, different regulatory bodies also have different ideas when it comes to your legs. By United States doctrine, most airlines still advise you to keep your feet firmly planted to keep a more stable point for your torso and head. Whereas in areas like the UK, protocol is to tuck your legs as tightly as you can to the seat you're sitting on. This is to prevent a common injury in plane crashes when your legs fly forward and hit the bar of the seat in front of you, which in a lot of cases, as you can imagine, breaks your shin. Whereas if your legs are tucked against your own chair, they are less likely to fly out and hit something. However, once again, it's a trade-off, because if your legs are tucked in against your chair, that is a less stable point for your upper body than to have them firmly planted. But similar to the hand thing, both doctrines have their own arguments either way. Of course, in both of these strategies, you are firmly wrapped against the seat belt across your lap. This helps with jackknifing and submarining. Jackknifing is when you're setting away from the seatbelt and are thrown into it, which can cause abdominal injuries. And submarining is when you're so far back and leaned backwards that at the moment of impact you slide under the seatbelt, and neither of which is a good idea. Also, in both of these strategies, your head is ducked below the line of seats. As mentioned, that helps with flying debris, but in cases like the Canadian air flight mentioned earlier, it prevents injury from things like a flashover. Now, of course, everything I mentioned so far is assuming there is a seat back in front of you to hold on to. If you cannot get to the seat back in front of you, so in other words, if you're sitting in an emergency exit row, on the front row of a plane, or just too short to reach the seat, then it's advised to adopt something called the pike position. It's effectively the same thing, but since you can't get to the seat in front of you, you just fold yourself all the way down. I need to bring the microphone down. Thank you. You fold yourself all the way down underneath your legs, either grabbing your own forearms to keep yourself compact, or, as mentioned earlier, overlapping them along the back of your head to protect yourself from debris or head injury. It's also advised, again because there's no seat in front of you for you to hit your shins on, to keep your feet firmly planted to once again give yourself further stability. And if your feet cannot touch the floor, again for children or short people, just tuck them against the chair as tightly as you can. The strategy with all of these is to make yourself as compact as possible. You're not going to be able to fully put off the force of the plane crashing, so you want to be in a position where the force can do as little damage to you as possible. The only situation where the strategy is severely different is for flight attendants who have a backwards facing seat. Again, crashes tend to happen when a plane is moving forward. So all of those positions I just showed were to prevent you from being thrown forward or mitigating the damages when you are. Well, if a flight attendant is facing the back of an airplane, then they're not going to be thrown forward in a crash, they're going to be thrown backward. So then, best practice goes back to the old strategy, placing your head against the seat back as hard as possible, and either putting your hands underneath your thighs or across your chest. The backwards facing seat is actually one of the safest places to be in the event of a plane crash, because all of the force is pushing you into the cushioned seat you're already sitting in, rather into the metal seat that you're sitting behind. In both instances, airplane seats actually do a really good job at absorbing most of the energy from an impact, and all of the brace positions are designed so that the majority of that force transfers to the chair rather than your body. And those practices make sense. Think about situations like airbags. The entire idea of an airbag is that a surface comes out and catches you, slowing your speed from flying into the front of the vehicle. And while specific cases of which form is best can be argued, from survivor reports to crash test investigations, it's no question that brace positions up your survivability rate by an extreme degree, according to some studies as much as 3 times. That is, of course, when they're not trying to kill you, as the conspiracy states. So the conspiracy theory that inspired this video is that these brace positions are actually meant to kill you. It is no secret that airlines or airplane manufacturers will do everything in their power to pay out as little as possible in the event of an accident. Not only does every institution do everything in their power to point the blame somewhere else, the airplane manufacturer will say it's the airline's fault, and the airline will say that it's air traffic control or the airport's fault, and the airport will point back at the manufacturer. But when someone is eventually forced to foot the bill, they will lowball those affected as much as possible under threat of a lengthy and expensive legal battle otherwise. And while new legislation is being made every year in order to prevent this, it still happens. So the theory says, what if the airline would rather you just die so they don't have to pay out your injuries? The logistics of this go as follows, but there are some differences depending on who you ask. Effectively, it states that by placing your head against the seat in front of you, a seat which again absorbs most of the shock of a crash, that force goes through the chair in front of you, into the top of your head, and snaps your neck. ensuring that the airline has to deal with as few injured clients as possible. Accents to this theory go even further. One example being, the reason that you are told to curl up and protect your face is so that after the crash, your teeth are intact, meaning you are easier to be identified from your dental records. Positions like the pike position for those on the front row of the plane are made so that their head is in a perfect missile position to fly, I guess, through the seatbelt into the wall in front of them, instantly shattering their skull. Another component is that the oxygen mask that drops down from the above head compartment actually deprives you of oxygen, which makes you pass out, which then makes your unconscious body flail around when the plane hits the ground, meaning you're more likely to die. Which I thought, according to the theory, you're more likely to die if you do the thing you're supposed to and hold your head against the kill seat in front of you, but whatever. Or even that the life jackets that are issued in the event of a water landing is so that your body can float up to the surface in order to be identified. Again, I would argue that life jackets also have the habit of life, and not drowning, but I digress. So let's talk about this theory for a second. Not even addressing the fact that hundreds of thousands of people across aviation and regulation companies and stuff like that would have to be in on the plot. And there would have to be a countless number of people that know airliners are designed to kill people in the event of an accident, and they're just okay with that, I guess. Not even addressing that. The regulatory bodies that come up with the brace position aren't the ones who have to pay out if there's a plane crash. Brace positions are designed by like the FAA and iBrace. While you could argue it's suspicious if Boeing or American Airlines were the people coming up with these positions, and I can agree with that somewhat. If American Airlines told me on a perfectly normal plane to sit still and everything was going to be okay, I would probably assume they were going to shoot me. But it's not them who is coming up with the crash positions. It is the people who regulate and make legislation around them to ensure customers are safe and that they pay their dues when customers aren't. But sure, you could argue FAA and airlines and all that are in cahoots and have this massive conspiracy worked out between them, sure. But in concept, the theory doesn't make sense. It says that companies do this so they don't have to pay out injuries in the event of a crash. But you know what's way more expensive than injuries? Dying. While there is new legislation that dictates the minimum amount an airline is required to pay in the event of serious bodily injury is around $140,000 US, and there's new legislation on the way that brings that number up to more like $300,000. Companies that have to pay out in an accident will argue the legitimacy of these events and try to get the number down as low as $10,000 or $20,000. Whereas when someone dies, the payout is normally in the millions. According to Keystone Law, in the United States, the average payment when someone dies in an airplane crash is $5.2 million. Now, the United States is way ahead of other countries because the U.S. doesn't have a limit on, like, bereavement lawsuits, whereas countries like England and Wales cap it around £15,000. In the U.S., if someone you know dies because of malfeasance on an airline or airplane manufacturer's part, you can pretty much argue for whatever you want to be paid. Now, it is true that there are some injury lawsuits in airplane crashes that far exceed this number, with some people who have permanent injuries that don't allow them to go back to work or they have to be in rehab for several years. Those lawsuits can be $8–10 million. But those are exceedingly rare. Typically, people have injuries that they can walk away from or recover after some point in time, or they die. On average, by far, companies pay out way more for death than they do injuries. Death can also go way higher than the 5 million number. In cases where, like, CEOs or something like that are killed, the number will be 20–30 million. That's because a lot of the time in these cases, the damages that are given to family is based off of potential income that that person could have made throughout the rest of their life. Which, try to think about that for more than 10 seconds without being radicalized. It's way more expensive for companies if you die rather than just get injured. But even outside of that, the brace position just makes sense. In every other safety requirement we have for transportation, in car wrecks, for example, seat belts are designed to keep you from being thrown forward, and airbags are designed to give you a soft cushion to be thrown forward into. And we also have a ton of data that backs the brace position idea. Every now and then, the FAA or some aviation authority will have a controlled crash as an experiment, where they load a passenger plane up with a bunch of crash test dummies and run it into the ground to see what happens. Sounds like a cool weekend. Well, in 2012, a bunch of different television companies, like Discovery Channel in the United States and Channel 4 in the UK, partnered together to buy a Boeing 727, load it full of dummies, and run it into the Mexican desert to see what would happen. What's funny about this is normally when like the FAA does a test or something similar, they do it at a military base or in the middle of nowhere, so the entire flight is remote controlled. But when all these television companies came together to do it, the United States wouldn't let them do it anywhere, so they had to go to Mexico. And the only place they could do it in Mexico was in an open desert that was near a city. So the Mexican government wouldn't let them do the entire thing remote controlled because, you know, the airplane will be flying above a populated area. So a pilot team had to fly the plane until it got out of the city.
That felt so easy.
And then they parachuted out, and from there it was remote controlled into the ground. And with the crash test dummies, they had several of them in brace positions, they had several of them sitting upright, and they found that the brace position had a way higher chance of survivability. The largest injuries came from conditions outside of a brace position's control. For example, since the plane hit nose first, people sitting near the front of the plane tended to be the most injured, but there's not really a position that can help with that. That also doesn't always mean sitting near the front of the plane is the most dangerous. Sometimes planes will crash with the tail hitting first or on the side. But from areas of similar exposure, the brace position saved a lot of lives. The dummies that had used the brace position were more prone to things like ankle or leg injuries, which is exactly what the brace position is supposed to do. It transfers that energy there rather than your chest or neck. Dummies that did not have the brace position, their legs were perfectly fine, but their necks were snapped. I'll let you pick which one you want to be. But even outside of test, we have real-world examples of the brace position working. In 1991, Scandinavian Flight 751 had a major wreck upon landing. I mean, look at pictures of this. The plane is broken up into 3 pieces. It looks like it would be a huge casualty count. But before the crash, a brace position was ordered and flight attendants walked around ensuring that everyone was in the proper position. And miraculously, everyone lived. Sure, there's various injuries to arms and legs, but everyone was still breathing. Because of that, this instance is often referred to as the miracle at Katrora. In other instances, like U.S. Airways Flight 1549 or the Miracle at the Hudson, the event which the movie Sully is based on, the majority of the 100% survival rate there can be attributed to the captain's quick thinking, but another factor that led to everyone getting off the plane was everyone adopted the brace position. Sure, the plane didn't hit the water hard enough to kill anyone probably, but if someone got their head thrown forward and got knocked out, they probably couldn't have got off the plane in time. And in several survivors' testimonies of plane wrecks that resulted in some fatalities, several survivors have contributed their survival to the brace position. They even tested this on Mythbusters. They had a whole episode where they discussed the myth that the brace position is designed to kill you. And while sure, made for TV, you could argue the legitimacy of it, in every test they did, the dummies that adopted the brace position received far fewer injuries than those that did not. Also, Carrie Byron was one of my first childhood crushes, so with respect to my wife, of course, I'll believe whatever she tells me. All in all, it is fun to theorize and think about these things in a sort of morbid concept. And I am not arguing the legitimacy or good intentions of companies that are involved in airplane crashes. But again, the brace position isn't even designed by them, and by all data that we have, it seems to work. While things like this are fun to theorize and think about, maybe not the best idea to tell people things that could quite literally get them killed. But of course, if you yourself believe this, that, you know, airplanes are trying to euthanize you like a chicken in the event of a crash, and if you're ever in a plane crash and want to follow through on that belief till the very end, well, that's between you and God, and probably some attorneys. Regardless of the theory, I think that the history of brace positions is pretty cool. How through these awful events, we were able to put something useful out of it. There was good information gained from all the bad. And I think that's interesting, and if you think that's interesting, that's really cool, and I just want to say thank you for watching. The conspiracy theory kind of gave me an excuse to talk about the history of brace position, something you're probably familiar with, but never really thought about before. And it's interesting how, like, one bit of information led to another, and yeah, I just thought it was kind of neat. Again, if you want to check out these videos over on Spotify, link will be in the description, and if you want even more of my content for some reason, head on over to Wendigang, where we will try to maintain weekly uploads moving forward. And thank you guys so much for the support you've already shown on both. New content on the way, and this should do it for now, but before I go, I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. But also, I really wanted to show this clip from the movie Airplane, but I was trying to, set up the story in the beginning, and it seemed a little in poor taste to mention it in the midst of like people dying and stuff. So I'm gonna do that now.
All right, now everybody, get in crash position.
Hey, so remember how in the last video I said that I was going to be reworking the iceberg to add like more interesting things and stuff that I just think would work for the series, and how I said it was going to be about the same size? Well, I had one of my moments and decided to just keep adding more and more stuff, and then the iceberg that was previously like 80 to 100 terms now looks like this. So I don't think we're finishing this in December. At least not this December. I have compiled an iceberg of 350 different cryptids. Now, I don't think I got every cryptid in the world, but I do think I at least got nearly every type of cryptid in the world. For example, nearly every culture has some kind of werewolf figure or some kind of Bigfoot figure, so maybe I didn't get every specific one, but I got all the big ones. So hopefully this massive list can satisfy whatever I'm trying to prove to myself. A link to the iceberg image will be in the description, and when I posted this on Twitter, some people were confused as to why it seemed that some things near the bottom of the iceberg were more well-known than stuff around the middle. And the reason for that is I didn't entirely structure this iceberg off of known to unknown, because then, like, the bottom 3 tiers would be just a bunch of really obscure dog-looking things that were reported in the jungle one time, and I don't really think that would make for an interesting finale to the series. So instead, I have ranked this iceberg by vibes. Like with the beginning, we're still sticking with the well-known stuff, but as the iceberg goes down, it gets to a lot more of the obscure and strange, especially around the middle, but then at the bottom, it gets to the ethereal, or the spectral. Like sure, the iceberg still starts with a lot of the well-known famous cryptids, but then as you go down, it starts to get to more of the unknown cryptids, and then at the bottom, it starts to get to the more obscure or paranormal or almost ethereal cryptids. That's because I wanted to rank this iceberg by more so the enjoyment factor that you all should get throughout the series. For now, we continue to talk about the creepy and the monstrous, and then we get into more implications, things that maybe didn't go extinct.
Where you get dropped into the shockingly authentic world of the story. The spine-tingling tale is set in Christmas 1975 on an oil rig off the coast of Scotland. You have to navigate a collapsing oil rig to save yourself and your crew from an unknown horror on the edge of all logic and reality. Run, climb, swim your way to safety in this terrifying adventure. Still Wakes the Deep is out now on PC, Xbox Series X and Series S, and PlayStation 5. I'm Ryan Bergara, and this is Are You Scared? A show where I tell my friend Shane Madej the internet's scariest stories. So lock your doors, turn off the lights, and let's see if we can make it till the end of the night. I was woken up by the silence. Since I'd arrived on the platform a month earlier, there hadn't been 3 seconds of quiet. Every moment was a torrent of ocean waves crashing on the support columns, wind screaming through the gantry work, and above all else, the endless grinding of the drill.
What's a gantry?
A gantry, I believe, is like a part of like a drill structure. A crane, there you go. It's a crane.
Gantry.
Yeah.
It's one of those words I don't know because I haven't worked on an oil rig. I'll fess up, I never done time on an oil rig. I'd love to. Is that privileged to say that?
Maybe.
I'd love to. I like the sea.
It's hard to explain unless you've worked on an offshore oil rig, but you actually get used to the noise.
Just offshore oil rig worker things.
Yeah, no, you get used to the noise. Things all offshore oil riggers should know. Yeah. Something we would have made at BuzzFeed. Eventually, it's the brakes and the noise that stand out like an air horn. That morning, the silence meant the drill had stopped. And the drill stopping meant we were in trouble. Our platform was state-of-the-art. Godal's newest structure, built in what had, until recent breakthroughs in graphene, been a no-man's land for drilling companies. The seafloor was too far from the surface, and the oil underneath was too hard to find. Honestly, no one was sure why they chose to build it. No other company had set up a platform within 100 miles of us, but there we were. An international crew speaking 3 different languages, trying to operate a brand new drill so far off the coast of Japan that we may as well have been on the moon. Now, this sounds like something you wouldn't enjoy, because I know for a fact one of your deepest fears is being alone or being out in the ocean, in the deep sea.
I like a nice little fort, though, is the other thing.
Is that why you play Fortnite?
Zero build. No,
What does that mean?
I don't build forts.
Oh, I see.
I like the idea, though, that I'm in a structure.
Yeah.
That is preventing, it's protecting me from the elements.
Yeah.
I like that quite a bit. It's like when you're in a very chilly room at night and you have a nice bit of covers, all except for your little face.
Yeah.
And you feel the cold. That's what I would be like on this oil rig. I'd be protected.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, something tragic and disastrous happened, which I'm sure won't happen here.
Yeah. Seeing as how this is Are You Scared, I'm sure everything's going to go peachy.
Japan, huh? They drill over there? I don't know. I'm not asking you to answer for all of Japan.
Seems like you are.
I'm just asking if you know.
I can only answer for half of Japan because I'm only half Japanese, and I will say, we be drilling.
We
I pulled
be
my hard
drilling.
hat on as I emerged on deck.
We be
All
drilling.
3 crews were there, peering down into the water, each face as upset by the quiet as I was. The other 2 crew chiefs approached me. Yuri spoke only Russian, but Lee knew a little English in addition to his native Korean. Our primary form of communication came via translation apps on our phones. Stopped, Lee said to me as he typed more into his phone. Yeah, I can hear that, I replied, waiting for him to finish. After a couple seconds, his phone read in a robotic voice what else he knew.
3.5 miles deep. Drill working great. Sudden stop. System unresponsive. We need shut down and start up.
Could you imagine if we could only talk to each other through like a little obelisk voice, like on Ghost Files?
That'd be annoying.
It would be the worst.
Also just not very timely for a pressing situation.
You'd probably be getting killed as you were typing. Ouch.
Oh my god!
Lee died. My leg. Bleeding. Ouch.
You know what I'm finding very interesting is that this story that you teased as being about a sound that drives people crazy starts with silence. Rich.
I turned to Yuri and waited for his phone to translate the information into Russian. He began shaking his head and typing. Finally, his phone read.
No signal. No communication for too long. Wait for supply ship. 3 days.
Not a good situation.
What's going on here?
Their ship, their oil rigger, is not working. And I guess, I don't know, maybe this is my ignorance about oil rigging. But I feel like if my drill didn't work, I wouldn't be like panicking. I'd be like, looks like we're just chilling for 3 days.
A little R&R.
This again. Yuri and Lee were both good leaders to their guys, but they disagreed on almost every big decision, leaving me to break the tie as the 3rd crew chief. Lee wanted to reboot the entire platform, which would put us offline for 6 hours. It meant no contact with the mainland, but would also make it nearly impossible for Lee, Yuri, and I to communicate, as the SAT Wi-Fi would be down as well. SAT's short for satellite.
Oh.
Boat speak.
Cool.
The SAT's down.
I didn't know that.
Not ideal. The drilling had been slow, and we were already falling weeks behind. Yuri's phone read out his counter-proposal. He wanted to wait until we at least had our supply ship's comm systems as a backup. That would certainly be safer, but it also meant 3 more days without drilling. Choosing between the 2 options was obvious. Radio to Kadal. Tell them we have to do a hard restart. As Yuri's phone translated for him, I could see him start to protest. Before he could, 6 hours, Yuri. It will be okay. Enjoy the silence. Okay, so yeah, we're being set up here for silence, possibly bringing in something bad.
Yeah.
Nice detective brain.
Yeah. I'm smart.
Okay, I take that back. When his phone translated, Yuri shook his head. I expected him to be mad, but instead, he looked worried. He typed into his phone, which translated.
Bad idea. Bad feeling.
No, it sounds like something I say to myself in the mirror every morning. Bad idea, man.
Bad idea to be you and awake?
Everyone has to have a mantra. Mine just happens to be negative. I turn to my wife in the morning and she says good morning and I say, bad idea. With that, Yuri stomped away. Lee waved him off and made his way to the control room to radio the mainland and begin the restart.
So the restart's gonna take 6 hours?
Yeah. So they're gonna sit there for a little bit. You know, play some chess or something, or arm wrestle.
Maybe get to know each other a little bit, you know?
Like, physically? Or
physically. Do a little wrestling, you know?
Oh, what kind of wrestling? You talking about, like, wrestling?
4 on the floor, baby.
Little bore on the floor?
Maybe a little bit.
I thought it was silent when the drill stopped. But when our electric systems and generators powered down, that's when it really got quiet. The crews found spots on the deck to play cards, read, anything to take up the time and keep minds off the fact that you are suspended 10 stories above the middle of the ocean on an exposed scaffolding. Well, when you put it that way, it doesn't sound that cool. Because I'm kind of scared of heights.
It's not just scaffolding. There's like, it's a structure. It's a...
Yeah, but if you're out there on the gantry and you're just kind of chilling.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
A slight breeze maybe knocks you off.
I mean, I assume there are safety railings.
There's no safety on an oil rig, is there?
I think there's quite a bit of safety on an oil rig. I mean, except for when they, like, blow up, you know. They got safety, you know, they don't want you to slip on a banana peel and go like, whoa, and then fall over the edge.
I wanted to show Yuri there were no hard feelings, so I asked him to play a couple games of Durak.
What is Durak?
I don't know, it sounds like one of the monsters in Galaxy Quest.
It does.
It's a Russian card game, apparently.
Yeah, that scans.
By our second game, something was clearly bothering him. He was blinking hard and rhythmically, like an invisible finger was poking him every couple seconds, with Google Translate down until the systems finished rebooting. I tried to ask him if he was okay with a concerned look. Give me your best concerned look.
But we're playing a card, we're playing Durak.
I'm freaking out. I'm doing this. Here's my concerned look.